Now, do you recall in April of 1992 when Miss Lansing and I sat with you in your office at your development in Illinois? Do you recall telling us that you only saw from Eric conventional adolescent behavior towards his mother, and also love and respect?
Yes. I
Are you
don't know
telling
that I
us?
recall telling you that, but it's something I would have said.
It's something you would have said,
Mhm.
because it was true, right?
Your answer?
Yes, I would have said.
I wanted to clear up one thing, Mr. Anderson, about the match in Kalamazoo. I didn't follow up. You said that because the players switch courts during a match, that there was that you weren't always the same distance away from Eric while he was playing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you said that at the beginning of the match, you were approximately 20 feet away.
I don't know that I related it to the beginning of the match.
Okay. What was the closest that you were to him during that match?
Well, if I went up to the fencing, it could have been as little as probably 10 or 15 feet away, I would imagine. I'm a guesstimate on depth.
Okay. And did you see Jose Menendez go up to the fencing during the match?
I think that he did.
And in fact, wasn't it from that position that he was doing his signaling so that he'd be closer so that Eric would have a greater opportunity to see the signals?
Not necessarily. He would do it from there, and he would also do it from the stands, the
Okay.
seating area that we're at.
Did you hear him, meaning Jose Menendez, say anything to Eric, whether you remember the words now or not, in addition to giving signals?
During the match?
Yeah.
Not that I recall.
And you've already testified, I believe, that you don't recall anything that Eric might have said to his father during the match. Is that correct?
Specific words?
Yeah.
No.
So is that correct? You don't remember any specific words Eric said during the match?
I remember his frustration and his boisterous outbreaks.
Okay. And I think you've already testified. He was shouting at himself. He was shouting at the other player. He was just shouting.
Anyone who, yeah, that's right.
And I think you've also testified that after the match, you and I take it your wife, Pat, and your sister and Jose were together approaching Eric where he was packing up his bag. Is that right?
I'm not sure that Pat was part of that. She may or may not have been, but
Well, you're aware she testified that she was there.
Sustain.
Does it refresh your recollection if I tell you that Pat testified that, yes, indeed, she was there after the match?
oh, she was at the match, yeah.
She said, would it refresh your recollection that she testified she was there after the match and wanted to go up and console Eric, and your sister stopped her?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overall.
Okay, you're asking me to clarify what my wife testified to?
No, I'm
She
asking,
asked if that would refresh your
what
recollection.
does it refresh your recollection as to whether or not Pat was with you afterwards when you were all approaching Eric?
Well, whether she was there, whether she was one of the people approaching Eric, I guess is the difficulty. She was there. Whether she was one of the group going up to approach Eric, I don't recall that.
Well, who else was part of your group besides yourself, your sister, Jose, and
You were
your wife?
asking Leslie whether we went up to approach
Okay,
Eric.
let's refer to people by their proper names.
I'm sorry.
Save them some.
We know each other, but we have to be formal, Mr. Anderson.
My apologies.
Quite all right. No, what I'm saying is, who else was in your group? Wasn't it just the two couples, yourself and your wife, and Jose and Kitty? Weren't you the only ones who were together at the match?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I believe you testified you don't have any recollection of what it was that Jose may have been saying to Eric before Eric said, "Shut up." Is that right?
He was generally questioned. It would be general. The answer is no, I don't have specific words that he was saying.
But I think you said that he was generally telling him, what he did wrong,
I think he was more questioning rather than telling him.
questioning why he did wrong, that sort of thing.
He was questioning him.
And how long did this questioning go on before Eric said, "Shut up"?
Not very long.
And then I think you testified Jose said something and then you all walked off. Is that right?
Jose walked off. He made a comment about not being able to communicate with him and then walked ahead of the group.
Okay. And did the rest of the group walk also?
The rest of the group, as I recall it, Eric and Kitty and I believe my wife Pat at that time and myself walked pretty much as a group.
And you didn't see any other words exchanged between Eric and his father. Is that correct?
After that time,
Yes.
no, there was no exchange that I recall.
Now, would you characterize what you saw? Jose questioning Eric, Eric saying, shut up, Jose saying something about communication. Would you characterize that as an argument?
Oh, I characterize it as
You can answer that yes or no. If you
yes
would.
or no. Okay, as an argument.
Was that an argument?
Borderline, I guess, could be.
How did you describe it as? A second. Yeah, a second. Did you tell Mrs. Bozanich on the telephone about a month before you came out here to testify that Eric Menendez had talked back to his father and gotten into quite an argument with him? Did you use that phrase?
During the match or after the match?
No, what I'm asking, Mr. Anderson, is did you characterize this episode to Mrs. Bozanich by using the words quite an argument?
The arguing was going on during the match.
So you're saying during the match they were arguing?
Jose was trying to get his attention and Eric was, and the answer is yes, I guess, to the question.
Okay, well, an argument is two-sided, is it not, Mr. Anderson?
Overall.
I would say so.
Yeah, so what was Jose arguing to Eric?
He was discussing his performance on the match.
During the match?
Yes.
Now, that's sort of distracting for a tennis player, isn't it?
Objection called for conclusion.
Sustained.
That's not even permitted to talk to a player while they're playing, is it, Mr. Anderson?
There were breaks during the play.
Now, isn't it a fact that during the breaks in play, because Eric was behaving so strangely, his father was harassing him and criticizing him and on his case? Isn't that what was happening?
Wasn't my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And the kid couldn't handle it. He lost patience with this
Objection.
and finally said something. Isn't that what happened?
Calls for speculation, ma'am.
Sustained to the form of the question.
Didn't you, in fact, describe to Mrs. Bozanich, Eric, losing patience Eric lost patience with his father. Even at the break, Eric wouldn't look at Jose. Do you recall saying that to Mrs. Bozanich?
That's what happened.
Now, using the word patience implies that there was something that he endured before he lost patience, does it not?
Objection, argument, calls for conclusion.
Overall.
Would you ask the question again?
Yes, by using the word patience, that implies that there was something that Eric endured before his outbreak that he ultimately lost patience with, does it not?
He was enduring the loss of a match. There was a lot he was enduring.
Yes, and he was enduring his father's constant criticism and illegal signals, was he not?
Objection, argument, calls for speculation.
Overall.
He was enduring his father's communication, yes.
And what was your sister doing while Jose was illegally communicating with his son during the match? Was she relaxed and happy, or did she seem pretty tense?
Well, I think she was tense.
Now, you had been to matches before with your sister, and she was pretty tense during the boys' tennis, wasn't she?
She would feel the energy of her boys playing.
And if they won, she would be happy, right?
Oh, I'm sure, yes.
And if they didn't win, she wouldn't be happy.
She would be consoling.
She would be consoling, yes. Now, you realize many people have testified here who saw Mrs. Menendez at matches, and you're the only person who says she was consoling. Do you know that?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Is it your job here, do you think, Mr. Anderson, to try to paint a totally different picture of your sister than everyone else who has testified? You see that as your mission?
Excuse me, that is argumentative.
Sustained.
Now, you testified last Tuesday, which was the 23rd of November, that you made your decision to testify in this case 1 week to 10 days before last Tuesday. Do you recall that?
I don't recall telling you that I made a particular, that at some particular point I made a decision.
Well, let's go to the transcript. Need a moment trying to find this reference. Unfortunately, I didn't.
Yeah, let's see if the data come up.
I do apologize, Your Honor. I know it's here. This is page 22629. Okay. You were testifying last Tuesday, Mr. Anderson, about your interviews with Mrs. Bozanich. And I asked you in line 19, and then you talked to her again and indicated to her, about a week to 10 days ago, that you were now willing to be a witness in this case, correct? Your answer, she asked me if I would be a witness, and the answer was yes. Question, well, she had been asking you all along if you would, but it was only about a week or 10 days ago that you agreed. Is that correct? And you said that's true. Do you recall that testimony from Tuesday?
That sounds
Now,
correct.
what, Mr. Anderson, happened in the probate court 10 days before last Tuesday? On November 3rd, 1993.
If you have a specific incident, I can answer it, but I can't answer that question.
What happened in the let me ask you this. Are you aware that on November 3rd,
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
Yes. The jury's,
Yes, in seeking some parameters, Your Honor, our offer of proof would be that we would ask the witness the following questions. The first question we'd ask is whether in 1990 and 1991 he participated in reaching agreement that the estates of both Jose Menendez and Mary Louise Menendez could pay the costs of the legal defense for Eric and Lyle Menendez. The second question would be that in April of 1992, he knew and was informed by myself and Ms. Lansing that Eric and Lyle Menendez had indeed killed their parents, and we met with him specifically to tell him why. And at that point, he did not take any action, either volunteering to be a witness nor attempting to do anything in the probate court. The next question would be, basically, isn't it true that he recently filed papers in the probate court seeking, and the ultimate ruling they're seeking, Your Honor, is that if there is any money left in the estates, of Jose and Mary Louise Menendez, it should all go to the Andersen side of the family. They have made that argument that none should be, should go to the Menendez side. And the fourth question would be whether he knows that on November 3rd, the probate judge said he would not hear Mr. Andersen's request to make this determination unless and until the boys are convicted. And what was communicated by the probate judge was that no members of the Andersen side of the family stand to inherit unless the boys are convicted. And then it was after that that he decided to become a witness. That would be the line of questions. And our main concern is that the specific amount, because I don't know if he even remembers it, but
Did the probate judge say that members of the Menendez family would inherit if the defendants were convicted?
No. Well, he didn't say, he didn't rule either way on the merits of it. What he filed.
I'm just asking because you limited it to a statement relating to the Andersen side of the family.
No, what it is what he understood that meant was that his petition, his opposition that he filed wouldn't even be heard, which was seeking to have the Menendezes cut out and seeking to have funds restored to the estates would not even be heard unless the boys are convicted. If they're not convicted, then there's no way anybody is going to inherit except the boys.
Okay, well, you phrase it differently.
Well, I can phrase it that way if that's better. And our main concern is, first of all, not to get into a whole lengthy analysis of whether his position seeking recoupment, which he is seeking, is right or just, but just the indication that he took this position in the probate court recently, seeking to assert the Andersen side interest. And only when that, in fact, he took that position, I believe, in September, and only when the hearing was continued did he agree to, and that Judge Shiner made it clear what the condition precedent was, did he decide to testify. And I don't think under that the specific amounts of anything, either the expenses or the fees that he's seeking to stop or the fees that were paid to lawyers are relevant.
Anything else?
That's what we'd like to prove, and we'd like to know what limits, if any, there would be placed on the prosecution.
Well, I have no idea what the prosecution intends to do, so I'd have to hear them first.
Right.
What is your position?
I have to see how the questions are answered before I certainly intend to ask him some questions such as, why did you do what you did? I would also object to the hearsay statements of counsel as to why the crime occurred relating to question 2.
Oh, I wasn't going to ask him to relay what we told him, but only that we did tell him that they did it and what the defense was, if that's a more neutral way to put it.
All right. And as far as telling the court what my cross-examination is going to be, I don't know. This is a matter, the probate, we have access to some of the probate file, but much of it's concealed. And so I'm just going to have to operate like doing normal process or normal redirect examination.
Well, we are trying to get some kind of ruling here, Your Honor. I think that people are being coy. I mean, I think she can tell us now whether she feels and has an argument to support the position that the specific numbers are relevant.
Which numbers are you referring to?
Well, mainly the legal fee numbers, but subsidiary to that, because it would be extremely consumptive, unduly consumptive of time. We get into the numbers of what the executors are requesting for their extraordinary fees, what their lawyers are requesting, what their accountants are requesting, which are all matters that he is opposing. What the costs were, what the specific expenditures totaling $1.4 million were on the Calabasas house that he is seeking to have the Bilals personally repay to the estate. I think all of that gets unduly complicated.
What is the people's response to those
Your Honor,
numbers?
the fact that he filed a petition in court seeking to have the Andersons, the question's going to be couched in seeking to have the Andersons side inherit should they be convicted. I think needs explanation, and I'm going to ask him to explain why it was he filed this petition. And I think he's entitled to answer the question. I mean, you can't just ask a question a certain way and then tell the prosecution or the other side that they can't try to explain, especially when this question may not be accurate, that that's exactly what he did. So I think he should be allowed to explain what his understanding was of what he was doing and why he did it.
Well,
In terms of filing this petition, it is something that occurred rather recently.
Well, when the offer by the defense is that this shows bias, then the appropriate question of the witness is, why did you do these things? And without knowing his answers, it's hard to put limits on it. But you certainly do expose the witness to attack on his credibility, and he's entitled to answer why he did certain things to refute the inference that you're trying to draw.
well, I'd like
And if-
people to tell us what he's going to say. I'm sure they have the answer.
You know, I don't know what he's going to say. I specifically didn't ask him about this because
Well, I don't think this is something that has to be explored in advance, so you know what the answers are going to be before you ask the questions. This is just part of a trial, and
Well,
you
what remains?
ask questions and you take your best shot as to what the answer is going to be and whether you can deal with it or not.
I understand that ordinarily, Your Honor, but here we are specifically seeking some limitation to this because this thing could, I mean, this is what he filed. And we could go through it all, and then we could go through the entire accounting. I mean, it could open the door to all of this stuff.
That's true.
We're
It
trying
could.
to do this in a relatively limiting way, and we're trying to get the court to exercise its discretion under 352. Now, the court can't do that if the prosecution, won't reveal what they think the answer is going to be. Our concern is that numbers not be discussed because that will get us into a long and lengthy litigation about these numbers. If he wants to say he did it because he loves his sister and he hates the testimony, fine.
Well,
But
what you're asking me really to do is listen to his answer and then say, well, part of that's sufficient and that rehabilitates him, and the rest of it is extraneous and doesn't have to come in because it really doesn't rehabilitate. But I really can't do that. I, in essence, would be weighing the evidence and not ruling on its admissibility. So I can't evaluate it in that fashion. You're asking for the court to accept your questions and then put limits on the answers, which I can't do.
Well, but what we're asking for is some ruling on relevancy, that the amount of the legal fees is not relevant.
Your Honor, at this particular point, it's not my intention to get the witness to say exactly how much he thinks the defense attorneys are being paid. But if part of his explanation for why he filed this petition is he thinks they're being paid too much or that the money's been squandered or something like that, then it might become relevant.
All I can tell you is that if he made that answer, since there is no claim in his petition for that will just open the door on the entire petition and what he is asking for, and that's going to involve very extensive litigation, none of which has anything to do with the amount of the legal fees, which he never contested and doesn't contest. It's not in these proceedings.
Well, as I said, I can't get into the specifics until I hear what his explanation is and how he answers these other questions that you've asked. You expect certain answers that are favorable to the defense, and his answers might be different. As I mentioned at the sidebar, this whole area is just opening the area up for litigation that the defense has sought throughout the trial to avoid. And if you want to bring it out now at this late stage, then we have to hear what the witness says before we can rule on I can rule on the specifics of his answers.
We're having a conflict.
I see that.
What we'd like to do, which I sense the court will not allow us to do, is to have a testimonial 402 and see what the witnesses answer.
I don't see this.
That you won't let us do that.
I just don't see this as a type of issue that requires such a hearing. This is a typical cross-examination where you ask the questions and you get answers.
All right, let's do it. All right, Judge. You have often said to us, all you can do is roll the dice roll.
Okay. All right, are we ready then with the witness? All right, let's get the jurors in, please.
Judge, there was one other brief issue. This concerns the law Menendez jury. The court ruled admissible conversation between this witness and Jose Menendez, and at the time the court ruled it admissible, the court said it would give a cautionary instruction about the limited purpose for which that was offered. I have the transcript marked at the appropriate time of the court to do that.
That relates to this witness and his testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
But since the court has to instruct on the Eisenberg
Right.
testimony, we could perhaps do that.
Okay. If you could find that for me, I'd
I
appreciate it.
have it here. I'll give it to the court at the break.
All right. All right, let's get the jurors in, please. Yes. All right, all the jurors are back. You may continue your cross-examination.
Okay, I just want to change the subject briefly here, Mr. Anderson. I want to go back to when you were at your home in Illinois in early August of 1989, and Eric and your sister were there. This is with reference to the camcorder, okay? Now, you recall your sister and Eric going to the airport to pick it up, is that right?
Remember them leaving the house to go up there, that's correct.
And you remember them coming back with it?
I'm not sure if I was there when they arrived back.
Did you at some point later that day see the camcorder?
As I recall, I did.
I believe you previously testified it was about a foot long and there was a carrying case with it. Is that your recollection?
That's correct.
Now, did you hear your sister talking about, either to you or to Eric or to anybody else in your presence, about sending the camcorder back to wherever it came from?
Don't remember that conversation.
And in fact, did it turn out that your sister wound up using the camcorder at Kalamazoo?
That's correct.
And did she appear to know how to use it already, or did someone instruct her on its use?
She was using it.
You didn't see anyone instructing her on how to use it?
I don't recall.
Was she sort of handy with gadgets that way, that she could figure things out?
She was mechanically inclined.
And I believe you testified that you went to Kalamazoo, you flew, and Kitty and Eric drove, and you all met up again at the airport in Kalamazoo?
I'm not, either she drove or I flew her. I don't
Okay.
remember exactly how it went.
So
Somewhere,
it's possible.
we wound up there together.
Okay, it's possible that you flew Kitty and Eric
possible.
in your plane. And did she use the camcorder on the first day that you were in Kalamazoo with her?
She used the camcorder for the tennis matches. I don't remember that there were any tennis matches on the first day.
Okay. And how many days did you stay in Kalamazoo on that particular trip?
If I remember right, it was 3 days.
And did you see her using it? You said you saw her using it for the tennis matches. Is that right?
That's correct.
Was it just to film Eric's matches or other people's matches as well?
She was using it. She may have been filming other things going on.
And did she keep it with her, or did she give it to Eric at any point? Let me ask you this. Every time you saw it at Kalamazoo, was it in your sister's possession?
Oh, she was using it. I think possibly Eric used it as well.
Okay. Right in front of her, correct? Eric used it right in front of her.
Oh, so
Yes. I want to go back to something else you testified to on your direct examination. You testified with respect to Louisville. Let me see what you said. You testified that you saw some of his matches at Louisville, but you did not stay to the end, correct?
for the whole week?
Right. Well,
I
to
did
the
not-
end of
I did not
Eric's
stay
play.
for the whole week.
Excuse me?
I did not stay for the whole week.
And you testified in counsel, this is at 22558, that you learned later that after you left, Eric continued to win. Is that correct?
I call down there every day.
But you did learn that later, correct? That he continued to win.
I call down there every day.
But that's not my question. You have to answer the question. The record has like a hole in it, okay? You learned later from your sister that Eric continued to win.
When I called down and talked to my sister, she updated me on his winning.
Okay. And did she also tell you, therefore did you also learn later that when he finally lost at Louisville, it was due to heat exhaustion?
That's what I was told.
And were you also told that, in fact, he played in that hot weather more than any other player in the tournament? He played more matches than anybody else?
I think that's correct.
Okay, now, I want to take you back now, Mr. Anderson, to 1990, after the time that Eric and Lyle were arrested. It's true, is it not, Mr. Anderson, that during 1990 and early 1991, you were actively involved in negotiating the agreements between Eric and Lyle and attorneys
That's
to
correct.
represent them? And it's also true, is it not, that you agreed and your stepmother, Doris Andersen, agreed, and Maria Menendez agreed that the estates could pay the costs of the legal defense for Eric and Lyle in this case?
But there was an agreement that was concluded too.
And it included those persons I've just named.
I'm sorry.
It included the persons I've just named.
Doris, no, I don't know that it included my name, but it included Doris and
Maria Menendez.
Maria Menendez.
But you were actually...
And my father, I think, as well as his estate.
Okay. Let me just set up a chronology here. Your father died when?
He died July 7th, I believe it was, 1990.
Okay. And subsequent to that, his heir was his then wife, Doris Andersen, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you became ultimately the attorney. You have the power of attorney for Doris Andersen.
I was given that. That's correct.
Yes. And you did the actual negotiating and actively participated in this agreement that was worked out through the probate court, correct?
I was one of the people, yes.
And you attended the probate court hearings from time to time, correct?
Some of them, yes.
Now, I've referred before to April of 1992. That's when Ms. Lansing and I were in the Chicago area and met with you. You recall that?
I remember you meeting with me in Chicago.
And in April of 1992, when we met with you, I don't understand that. In April of 1992, this is what happens when you have a group action here. When we met with you, you knew at that time, did you not, that Eric and Lyle indeed killed their parents? And in fact, we discussed with you what the defense was in the case. Do you recall that?
I believe that's about the time I found that out.
Okay. And in fact, we had come to Illinois to talk to you and to talk to your brother and to talk to other family members to explain and try to help you understand what had happened. Do you recall that?
That was calling for Thursday.
Sustained is the form of the question.
Okay. Was it your understanding that when we were there in April of 92, we met with a number of members of the family, not just yourself?
Objection calls for Thursday.
Overruled. Answer?
Yeah, I did answer, yes.
I didn't hear you.
Yes.
And is it true, Mr. Anderson, that even after we met with you in April, or strike that, isn't it true that after we met with you in April 1992, you did not at that time contact the prosecution in this case and tell them that you wanted to be a witness for them? You didn't do that, did you?
That's correct.
And at that time, you didn't file any papers in the probate court seeking any benefit for your stepmother or your side of the family. Is that true?
I didn't file any papers.
Not in 92.
Well, I don't recall what years those were.
Okay. Well, do you recall, however, that this year, rather recently, on behalf of your father's second wife, your stepmother, Doris Andersen, you did file papers in the probate court.
The attorney for Doris Andersen did.
Okay, well, you signed the papers as her attorney, in fact.
Only until her signature could be gotten.
Okay, but you're well aware of the content of those papers.
That's correct.
And you're the person who deals directly with Alan Wattenmaker, the attorney.
That's correct.
And in fact, you've been dealing with Mr. Wattenmaker on probate matters since 1990 or early 91.
It's somewhere in there. I don't know. I can't remember exactly when.
Okay. And isn't it true that this paper that was filed in the probate court, among other things, is seeking a ruling that if there is any money left in the estates, it should all go to Doris Andersen?
I don't know that that's true.
You do know that there is a serious question about whether there is any money left in the estates, though, don't you?
That's been brought up.
And you do know that there was a status conference, we'll strike that. You do know, do you not, that before November 3rd, there was a trial set on your, the papers that you filed to determine these issues that you were seeking the court to decide? The trial date, I think, was set for November 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Could have been. There was a status hearing and then a trial date
Okay.
after that,
And the status hearing was set for November 3rd.
if that's the date.
Okay. And you're aware, are you not, what the probate judge did at that status hearing on November 3rd?
I wasn't there.
I know, but you're the attorney, Mr. Wattenmaker, certainly communicated with you that what the judge did, didn't he?
Well, is there a specific question? That's awfully general.
Okay. Well, there was no trial on November 8th or 9th, correct?
That's correct.
And your lawyer told you that the probate judge had taken your pleading off calendar on the grounds that unless Eric and Lyle Menendez are convicted, nobody else is entitled to inherit, correct?
I have not seen the order.
But that's your understanding of what it meant, that if they're that only if they're convicted does your stepmother, Doris Andersen, have any standing in the estate. Does she have
Well,
any chance of inheriting?
I think that's always been known.
And isn't it right after you heard that this pleading was taken off calendar and the statements of the probate judge that you then agreed to be a witness in this case?
The chronology, if that's how the chronology works out.
Excuse me, that is how the chronology worked out, correct?
Objection, argument.
Rephrase the question.
No, I think I was just repeating. Is that what you said, that that is the chronology? You have to answer out loud, Mr. Anderson.
I said if that's the answering to your question, if that's how the chronology works out.
Well, I need to ask you that. Is that how the chronology works out?
The dates,
Yes.
you have notes. I have no notes. I don't know exactly what those dates are.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you remember that it was after you learned of what happened at the status conference on November 3rd that you told Mrs. Bozanich that you would be a witness?
I can't relate to those dates because one does not relate to the other in my mind.
Oh, are you saying you don't remember whether you learned one thing before you said the other? Is that what you're saying?
I'm a lot of business in my life. Those things come and go.
You will agree, though, will you not, that November 3rd was more than 10 days before November 23rd?
Arithmetically, that works out.
So that if you had agreed to be a witness 10 days before November 3rd, that would have been 10 days after you learned of the probate judge's action.
10 days before November 3rd would have been back in October.
I'm sorry, I meant 23rd. 10 days
Rephrase the
before.
question.
All right. If you learned 10 days before November, well, strike that. If you made your decision to testify 10 days before November 23rd, that would be November 13th.
I
correct?
didn't say I made my decision. I don't think it's ever come up as to when I made my decision.
Well, that's when you communicated it to Ms. Bozanich,
That's
correct?
correct.
When was it that you viewed the videotape testimony of your former wife and your sister?
Well, I think within a week or so after it happened.
And you were aware that they were here in Los Angeles on a couple of occasions before they actually got to testify, were you not?
I was not.
Well, isn't it true, Mr. Anderson, that you tried to track them down here in Los Angeles to dissuade them from testifying?
Absolutely not.
Is there some agreement that you have with Doris Andersen where any monies that you may be able to get from the Menendez estates you may keep?
No.
Is Doris Andersen interested in obtaining money from these estates?
Assertion calls for hearsay and speculation.
Sustained.
Has Doris Andersen ever attended any of the probate court proceedings?
I don't.
Assertion calls for hearsay, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Have you ever seen Doris Andersen at any of the probate court proceedings?
No.
To your knowledge, has she ever come to California to attend those hearings?
She's been in California.
But to attend those hearings?
I've never seen one.
Have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, do you know a Los Angeles Times or former Los Angeles Times reporter named Ronald Sobel?
Your Honor, I would object to this as being beyond the scope.
Foundational.
Purposes. Or,
Solely foundational, Your Honor, to introduce a statement by the witness.
all right, objection overruled.
The question?
Yes. Are you acquainted with, or were you acquainted with a Los Angeles Times reporter named Ron Sobel?
I can't recall the names of all the reporters that tried to reach me.
Okay. Do you recall, have a moment. Are you familiar with the content of a Los Angeles Times article dated August 26th, 1989?
Your Honor, I object to that approach.
All right.
Mr. Anderson, did you speak at the memorial service here in Los Angeles?
Seems to me that I did.
And did you speak about your sister?
I did.
And would you say, Mr. Anderson, that your sister was, among other things, competitive and aggressive?
I do not recall what I said. It was immediately after the murders. I was still emotionally involved.
No, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking what you know. Would you say, I mean, was it your opinion that your sister was competitive and aggressive?
She was very competitive.
And now I'll ask you, do you recall saying at the memorial service, as competitive and aggressive as she was, it intensified when she and Jose married?
I could have said that.
It sounds true, does it not?
I could have said that.
It is true, isn't it?
I could have said that.
That's not what I'm asking you. We can all say things. Was it true that her competitiveness and her aggressiveness intensified when she married Jose Menendez?
They were both competitive, and there was a synergism, yes.
Yes. And wasn't it also true that, in your opinion, Jose certainly had met his challenge when he and Kitty became man and wife?
Are you asking me if I said that?
I'm asking you if you believe that to be true.
Well, I don't know that that's, do I believe it's true? I don't know.
Did you say that at the memorial service?
I may have.
And by met his challenge, weren't you referring to the fact that you considered your sister a strong person, strong-willed, strong personality?
She is. She was. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I have nothing further.
Any examination on behalf of the co-defendant?
No, Your Honor.
redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Anderson, you were just asked some questions about your decision to testify in this case. So I'd like to ask you, how do you feel about testifying in this case? How do you feel emotionally about testifying?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. I think that's rehabilitation.
Overall.
I love my sister and she loved me, and I'm here to convey what I know to be those matters that I knew about my sister and I experienced with my sister.
Now, in 1990, after the defendants were arrested, did you participate? I believe you were asked if you participated in the negotiations for the attorney's fees in this case, correct?
That's correct.
And at the time that you made those negotiations, did you believe that Eric Menendez and Lyle Menendez had not participated in the killings of their parents?
They told me they had not, and that was, everyone said they had not.
And at the time that they told you they had not participated in killing their parents, did you believe them?
Yes,
And when you participated in the fee negotiations, did you personally spend any money at any time on the attorneys?
on the attorneys,
Yes.
Which attorneys?
Okay, the defense attorneys, the criminal defense attorneys. After the defendants were arrested, you participated in negotiating for the estate to spend the money in the estate to pay the attorneys. Is that correct?
Okay. Other than airfare out here?
Yes.
No.
All right. And how long would you say you worked on the negotiations for the fees?
Oh, I received many phone calls from Miss Abramson, and there was some period of time.
All right. Now, did you ever discuss the fee arrangements with either of the defendants in visits at the county jail?
Yes,
All right. So did you keep the defendants up to date on what you were doing in order to negotiate the fees?
as best I could, because I couldn't call them, but they could call me.
And did they ever call you after you had become involved in the fee negotiations?
Oh, yes,
And did you ever discuss with them the fee negotiations?
constantly.
Okay. Now, what was your understanding as to what the estate was going to do in terms of paying the fees? In other words,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this.
okay, I'll rephrase it.
I think she's changing the question.
Where was the money going to come from to pay for the criminal defense attorneys to defend Eric and Lyle Menendez?
The term that I was given was called a family allowance.
And what money was going to be used to pay the family allowance?
The monies that were presently in the different accounts, and all things were brought up. The sale of the Beverly Hills house, the sale of stocks and bonds, the sale of the Calabasas house, whatever could be liquidated to produce the cash to pay the attorneys.
And so what was your understanding of what were the assets in the estate at the time that you were negotiating the fees for the defense attorneys for Eric and Lyle Menendez?
Your Honor, I object to this. It's irrelevant.
Sustain.
Okay, well, you've mentioned the Calabasas house, there was the Beverly Hills house, and stocks and bonds.
There were stocks.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. I think counsel's simply trying to re-ask the same question through
Overall.
suggestion.
Overall.
Is that correct?
There were stocks with, yes,
And those were all properties that had previously belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Menendez. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, so it was going to be their money that was going to be used to pay the legal fees. Is that
That
correct?
is
Objection, Your Honor. This is not
That is
direct
correct.
examination. It's legal.
Overall, the answer will stand.
Now, Mr. Anderson, did you at some point help an agreement to be reached whereby the money from your dead sister and brother-in-law would be used to pay the legal fees? Do you understand my question?
I do not.
All right. At some point, was there in fact an agreement reached wherein the money that had previously belonged to your sister and brother-in-law would in fact be used to pay for the legal defense of Eric and Lyle Menendez?
Yes,
And at that time that the agreement was reached, what did you still believe that Eric and Lyle Menendez had not killed their parents?
Your Honor, I believe that was asked and answered.
that's correct.
Overall, the answer will stand.
After an agreement was made to use the estate to pay the legal fees, was it then that you found out that they actually had killed their parents?
Mrs. Abramson told me that if she didn't receive the money
Well, I'm
soon,
gonna
she was going to
object-
quit.
I'm gonna
She was
object
going to
to
quit.
Okay, wait,
Okay,
let's
wait.
hold on here.
Response.
All right, the objection is sustained, the answer is stricken. Why don't you rephrase the question? It's rather imprecise as to,
Okay.
it's
Did you
also,
find,
why
okay,
don't you ask it in a different way?
okay. Did you find out that Eric and Lyle Menendez really had killed their parents before or after the agreement was made to pay the legal fees?
After.
Now, I believe you were asked some questions about this petition that you filed in the probate court recently. Do you remember the questions you were asked on cross?
Generally, yes.
All right. And what was the reason that you filed the petition in probate court? The one that was filed recently, this fall.
My father asked me before he died if I would continue which he asked me before, right from the very beginning, which is why I was participating in it, if I would stay with this until there was a conclusion. And I agreed to do that, and I'm doing it. I'm doing the best I can.
What is it you're trying to get from the probate court by this petition that you filed? What is your,
I'm going to object to that it's too broad in scope, under 352.
Are you asking what his purpose was in filing the document?
yes,
All right, why don't you ask that?
okay. Mr. Anderson, you said that the reason you filed it is because your father asked you before he died to stick with this thing to the end. Is that your testimony?
That's what he said.
All right, and what did you think you would accomplish towards that end by filing this petition in probate court?
The petition in probate court was for fees. It wasn't my petition. It was in response to a petition for fees by the executors of the estate and the council representing the executors for the estate, and the claims that they were asking for were not related to the estate and excessive.
All right, so in other words, you're trying to, you're challenging the amount of fees that have been charged by the executors of the state and their attorney, is that correct?
That's correct.
Because you feel they are excessive?
They didn't relate to settlement of the
Your Honor, I'm
estate,
gonna
and they were
object to
excessive.
this in opening the door to vote.
Overruled, the answer will stand.
And who do you understand the executors of the estate to be?
Terry and Carlos Farrell.
And who is the attorney that you understand to be the attorney who, whose fees you're challenging?
Their attorney, Mr. Goldberg.
Is that Stephen Goldberg?
That's correct.
Now, what is your understanding as to the amount of money that is presently left in the estate?
I'm not certain what the amount of money is left in the estate because they incorporate the Calabasas house, and to my knowledge, it has not been sold, and I don't know what it'll be sold for.
All right. Is it your understanding that there is a lot of money, like over $500,000 left in the estate?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
I believe, incorporating the Calabasas house, I believe the number was around 800,000 or 700,000, something in that area.
Now, why is it you decided to come testify in this case?
I think that was asked and answered, Your Honor.
No, it hasn't. Your answer?
I love my sister.
All right. And did your decision to come and testify have anything to do with this petition that you filed in probate court?
Not a bit. Didn't relate to it at all.
Do you need the money?
I do not.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you said this petition was a response to a request for fees by the executors and their attorney. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the object of this petition is to prevent them from receiving the fees that, as executors and attorneys, they're requesting, correct?
Fees that did not relate to the estate or that were excessive.
All right, but you're trying to keep them from getting paid, basically, right?
That's not correct.
Well, you're trying to keep them from getting paid what they're asking to be paid.
I'm very willing for them to get paid whatever they have coming.
But you dispute what they have coming, correct? You have a different number in mind than they do.
The fee, I think I answered this question, but
Well,
I'll answer
why
it
don't we try
again.
to answer it with a yes or no, Mr. Anderson, because it will save us all
All
a
right, why
lot of
don't you
time.
re-ask the question?
Isn't the purpose of your pleading, which in fact is called an objection, is it not?
An objection, what is that? We've never heard any of those things in this court.
Not that kind of objection, Your Honor.
okay.
It's objections to first account of executors, et cetera. Isn't that what it's called, the document you signed?
With the et cetera.
Well, it has more words, but the first words is objections. It's an objection to the account.
Why don't you read the whole document rather than just read a part of it?
Okay, Mr. Anderson.
All right,
I'll
why
be
don't
happy
you
to
ask
do that.
us another question rather than responding to the witness?
Is the title of the document that you signed on behalf of your stepmother objections to first account of executors, petition for allowance on account of executors, extraordinary commissions and fees for extraordinary legal services, and petition for surcharge?
That sounds correct.
Okay, now, there's two different things here. There's your objections to what the executors and their lawyer is asking for. That's one part. And then there's your separate petition for surcharge, correct?
I did not draft the document. Alan Wattenmaker drafted the document.
You understand those are two different things?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer.
Well, let me see if I can help you with this. On the one hand, the Baralts as executors, now 4 years later, and their attorney, Mr. Goldberg, and accountants as well, I understand, are asking to be paid a certain amount of money for work they claim they did on behalf of the estates. Is that a fair statement as you understand it?
In excess of the money they've already been paid, yes.
Okay, they've been paid something and now they're asking for these other things, correct? Yes?
Yes,
Thank you. And you are objecting to what they're asking for, correct?
I've answered that.
Is that yes?
Well, I'm objecting to anything in excess of what they should have coming.
What you believe they should have coming, correct?
What I understand, that's correct.
All right. Now, in addition to that, you're also asking that they be made to pay money back to the estate, correct? And that has to do with, you claim that they spent too much money completing the remodeling and renovation of the Calabasas house. And so you're arguing that they should have to pay back some of the money that was spent on fixing the house up, correct?
The document was drafted by Alan Wattenmaker.
I'm asking if you know what's in it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that that's
Well,
in it?
I don't know everything that's in it. I don't understand the thing totally. It's a legal document.
Do you understand that that is what the petition for surcharge is? You're asking them to pay back money that they spent to get the Calabasas house fixed up.
I don't know that it was a matter of paying it back or explain the reason for spending it. I think, I'm not certain.
Okay. Now, you are not doing this, Mr. Anderson, on behalf of Eric and Lyle Menendez. You don't represent their interest in probate court, correct?
Oh, you have your own attorneys.
I don't have any attorneys, but you're not doing this in order to get the money to them, correct?
I'm doing what my father asked with respect to his estate.
And what your father asked you to do is to try to get as much money out of this estate as you can, correct?
He absolutely did not.
All right. But what you're asking the probate court to do is to disallow these fees that the executors and their lawyers are asking for, maybe make them pay more money into the estate, and then determine that the Andersen side inherits. Isn't that what you're asking? You're not doing all this so that Eric and Lyle can get the money.
Is that
Counsel, that's
paragraph one
argumentative. Wait.
I'll
That's
break it
argumentative.
down.
Rephrase the question. Answer stricken.
Your father didn't ask you to go to probate court in order to make sure that Eric and Lyle have money, correct? That's not the thing he asked you to pursue to the end.
My father is dead and
I understand that. So you're not doing this on behalf of Eric and Lyle. You're doing this on behalf of Doris Andersen, his widow.
that's correct.
Now, you are a commercial real estate developer, correct?
That's correct.
And you work with legal documents all the time, do you not?
Relating to real estate contracts, yes.
And you're in fact rather fastidious about written agreements, are you not?
What do you mean by fastidious?
When Miss Lansing and I came to talk to you in April of 1992, you made us sign a 3-page agreement that any information that you discussed with us could only be used in very specific ways. Do you recall that?
I was, that's correct. I was concerned about your husband who's in a
Concerned about my
using-
husband who was a journalist. Is that
Journalist,
correct? Uh-huh.
yeah.
You didn't ask Mrs. Bazanich to sign any agreements before you talked to her, did you?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't ask Detective Zoeller, who's made public statements about this case, to sign any agreements. Is that correct?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Now, you made Miss Lansing sign an agreement too, did you not?
That's correct.
Her husband's not a journalist, he's a lawyer. Did you know that?
She worked-
Objection argumentative and the unspoken irrelevant.
Sustained as to the form of the question and answers.
Okay. You didn't believe Miss Lansing's husband was a journalist, did you?
No, you were working together, however.
I see. And you knew that, did you not, Mr. Andersen, when you, as of April 1992, that neither Miss Lansing nor I had publicly commented on any family-related matter in this case? You knew that.
I did not know that.
Well, you didn't have anything to show otherwise, isn't that true?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Let's get back, though, to probate court. Now, you said you were told that if one includes the Calabasas house, which is not sold yet, that there might be $800,000 in the estate?
I don't remember the accounting. I was estimating what I remembered from the sheet.
Well, isn't it true that there's still $600,000 owed to the IRS?
Again, I don't remember the documentation.
And $200,000 owed to the County of Los Angeles to reimburse the county for costs that the county has advanced for the criminal defense?
I don't have, I read the document. There's a lot of numbers in there. I don't know I don't think any of that was in there, but it may
In
have.
fact, the estate has no money if the taxes are paid and the debts are paid and the fees are paid to the executors and to Mr. Goldberg. Then there's less than zero left. Isn't that true?
I haven't.
Assumes facts not evidence lack of foundation.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. Isn't it your understanding that if these fees that have been requested by the executors and their attorney and the taxes and the costs owed to the County of Los Angeles are paid, there will be a negative balance in the estates? There'll be nothing, less than nothing.
I have not done the accounting on it. I don't know that firsthand.
Well, we're not knowing it firsthand, but that's your understanding, isn't it?
I have, we have not been given enough information to understand the estate. That was one of the reasons for the objection.
All right, but the fact is that right now with the information you have, that's what the financial picture looks like. There's less than nothing there.
I'd have to give you the same answer, Ms. Lansing. Ms. Abrams, and I have not. We have not been given enough information to understand it, and that's the reason we're just asking for information. We haven't gotten it. That's part of what that objection is.
Well, you're objecting because you're alarmed that there's no money there.
Objection argumentative.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Was it not a matter of concern to you, the financial condition of the estates, the level of depletion?
If my concern is to protect my stepmother and do what my father asked me to do.
Well, but that wasn't my question. My question wasn't it a matter of concern that your understanding is the estates have been so depleted that it is more than likely that there's nothing there?
I don't know that firsthand.
But you know that that's what the accounting shows.
I don't know that firsthand.
But you know that that's what the accounting shows, do you not?
I do not know that firsthand.
Do you know it's secondhand?
I don't know it thirdhand.
Okay, ask a different question, please.
All right. Now, you do understand that if the Calabasas house is not sold, then whatever the condition the estate is in, it gets worse because there's still mortgages that are being carried on that, correct?
I'm not sure that's true. It might be a good idea just to let it go. I don't know. There's, again, we don't have the information.
You do know that that house was right in the middle of the Agoura Malibu fire zone earlier this month, do you know?
As best we get that information in Chicago, their fire was in the Topanga Valley, as I understand it.
You didn't go over there to see?
I have not been there.
And so you don't know that all the houses around it burned, but it's still standing?
I have not been over there.
And that might somehow affect its value as real estate?
Your Honor, move objection. This is speculative and argumentative.
Sustained. Let's move on to something else.
Now, I just want to back up to one thing. You remember, Mr. Andersen, that the first time I met you was at the Beverly Hills house, and other members of the family were there, and there was a discussion about hiring attorneys for Eric and Lyle, correct?
I recall that.
All right. And now you've answered Mrs. Bozanich's questions that the legal fees were paid from this family allowance. Isn't it true that the first round of legal fees were paid by Eric Menendez?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall at this same meeting, Martha Cano was there?
I believe the Marticano was there, that's correct.
And you recall that it was indicated that Eric still had substantial funds in his accounts with Mrs. Cano, and those funds would be used first to pay for the attorneys.
I vaguely recall some accounting that Marticano had.
You vaguely recall that, correct?
That's correct.
I have nothing further.
Anything else? Okay.
Could I get some more water?
Sure.
Mr. Anderson, Doris Andersen is your stepmother?
That's
Is that
correct.
What is your understanding as to how she will succeed to Kitty Menendez's interest in the estate?
She is the heir to my father's estate.
And what is your understanding as to how she has any interest in Kitty Menendez's estate or Kitty Menendez's interest in Jose Menendez's estate?
She has whatever interest my father would have in the estate.
And do you know how she obtains an interest?
She's the heir to my father's estate.
And do you remember in the pleading, which has been referred to here, that it stated that Doris Andersen will succeed to Kitty's interest in this estate if the decedent's sons are determined not to be entitled to such interest pursuant to Probate Code 250. Kitty will have an interest in this estate if she is
Thank you.
determined to have survived Jose.
What pleading are you talking about?
The pleading that you and Miss Abramson have been discussing, that she read to you.
There's been a lot of documents that Ms. Abramson brought up to discuss. If you could clarify what you're talking about.
Well, do you remember the pleading which is entitled Objections to First Account of Executors? The one with a long title.
Yes,
All right. Do you remember a statement in that plea? By the way, you signed that pleading as attorney in fact for Doris Andersen, correct?
that's correct.
Right. And do you remember a statement in that pleading which says that Kitty will have an interest in this estate if she is determined to have survived Jose?
That's the Jose
I
estate.
think that's out of context.
Better make that clear.
And do you remember in the same statement, the same paragraph, the statement, accordingly, objector will succeed to Kitty's interest in this estate, that is Jose Menendez's estate, if the decedent's sons are determined not to be entitled to such interest pursuant to Probate Code Section 250.
Are you reading the entire paragraph or are you just taking a section, a part of it?
Well, I think I'm reading the entire paragraph, but could I approach a witness? Just
Yes.
Could you, Mr. Anderson, just take a moment to read the paragraph which I just referred to, which is highlighted there, and just read it to yourself if you could.
The paragraph starts on the prior page.
Yes.
I think the entire paragraph should be read and then I'll answer it.
Well, and by the way, this pleading is signed Doris Andersen by Brian Andersen, her attorney in fact, correct?
That's correct.
That is your signature, which is on the signature line for Doris Andersen. She didn't sign it, but you did, correct?
That's my printed name.
You said that you didn't need the money. Does Doris Andersen need the money?
I don't know what Doris Andersen needs.
And let me ask you again, what your understanding is as to how Doris Andersen will succeed to any interest in the Menendez estate.
She is the heir to my father's estate.
And do you recall the statement in this pleading which says, objector will succeed to Kitty's interest in this estate if the decedent's sons are determined not to be entitled to such interest pursuant to Probate Code Section 250. Kitty will have an interest in this estate if she is determined to have survived Jose.
I think if you read the entire paragraph, I'll answer the question.
Do you recall that statement in that pleading?
That's just, you asking me if that, is that part of what that paragraph says?
No, I'm saying, do you recall that statement is in this pleading, which I just showed to you?
That is part of that paragraph, that's correct.
And what did those two sentences I read to you mean?
If you read the entire paragraph, I think it'll be explanatory.
Well, the two sentences I just read you, I'm asking you what those sentences mean in this document that you signed. Could you
Later
tell
on
me
in
what
that,
you understand?
later on in that document, it states that Marlene Menendez would be the sole beneficiary, and that is particular estate is Jose Menendez, not Kitty Menendez. And it states that Marlene Menendez would be the sole beneficiary if Eric and Lyle do not succeed. And in that, we're clarifying for the court that may not be the case.
So this pleading clarifies for the court that it may not be the case that Maria Menendez, that is the grandmother of the mother of Jose Menendez, is not the sole contingent heir at law of deceit. Is that the part you're referring to?
It's possible.
Right. And the reason she would not be the sole heir is under the scenario which is outlined in the two sentences I read to you. That is, if Kitty is determined to have survived Jose, then she would not be the sole heir, correct?
You're in an area that I think is more for lawyers than it is for me.
I'm just asking what your understanding
But
is.
you're asking me understandings that's a legal document that was prepared by a lawyer, and you're asking me to clarify what the lawyer put in it, and
No.
I'm not in a position to do that.
I'm not asking you to clarify what the lawyer put in. I'm asking you for your understanding of a document that you signed and was filed in court. So my question is, what is your understanding as to how Doris Andersen succeeds to an interest in the estate? Yes.
As I said, the statement further on in that same paragraph, it states that Maria Menendez would be the sole heir, absent Lyle and Eric, and that for clarification for the court, we stated that may not be the case.
And it may not be the case if Lyle and Eric are convicted and it's determined that Kitty survived Jose, correct?
That's possible.
That's your understanding.
That's possible.
All right. Now, you said that the early on after the death of your sister and her husband that you were involved in the negotiations for attorneys, correct?
Is there early on? What does that mean?
Well, when was it that you became involved in the negotiations for the defense attorneys?
Not long after they were arrested.
And did you negotiate with any lawyers who were prospective attorneys for Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And was that Joel Isaacson?
I don't know that I negotiated with Joel. I may have. I met him.
Did you ever negotiate with myself?
I don't think we've met.
You and I have never met, correct? And you didn't negotiate with Miss Lansing, did you? In those
She
early
was-
stages?
She was an attorney working with Jerry Chaliff at the time, if I recall correctly.
But you had no negotiations with her personally.
No, she was not the lead attorney at the time.
And Jerry Chaliff was another prospective attorney that you had discussions with, correct?
I think he was hired by Lyle, as I recall.
But my question is, in terms of the people that you negotiated with, you did not negotiate with Miss Lansing nor myself, correct?
No, that's correct.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Any redirect?
No.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll be in recess until 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 1:30.
Karen Farrell. Farrell.
Mrs. Farrell, at the time of her death, were you a friend of Kitty Menendez's?
Yes,
And how long had you known her as of August the 20th of 1989?
approximately 6 years.
All right, and when is it that you first met her?
When they came out to California to move into their house, I met the boys and Jose and Kitty. They came over to our house for dinner.
And how was it that you became acquainted? Was there some sort of association between your son and the Menendezes that?
Yes, my son was a nationally ranked junior player, and Lyle and Steve played in the Nationals.
All right, and when you say he was nationally ranked junior player, is that in tennis?
Yes.
Okay. Are you nervous?
Yeah.
Okay. Take a deep breath. Okay. Mrs. Farrell, I believe then you met Mrs. Menendez when the family moved to California. Is that correct?
Correct.
And was that in approximately 1986 to the best of your recollection?
Yes.
Okay. So when you said you knew her 6 years as of 1989,
No.
would that be a mistake?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. After Mrs. Menendez moved to California, how would you classify how your friendship became? In other words, were you close friends with her?
Yes. Played a lot of tennis, horseback rode, went out to lunches. Just spent a lot of time together.
And when Mrs. Menendez and her family moved to Beverly Hills, did you continue to remain friends with her?
Yes.
And after the family moved to Beverly Hills, how often would you see Mrs. Menendez?
Oh, 2 or 3 times a month,
And before the family moved to Beverly Hills, did you see her more frequently?
about once a week.
When you saw her, when the family lived in Calabasas, would you see her inside of her home? Did you ever go visit her at her home in Calabasas?
Yes.
Did you ever see her around her children?
Yes.
After the family moved to Beverly Hills, did you see Mrs. Menendez around her children?
Yes.
And I take it you see Mrs. Menendez's children in court here today.
Yes.
And when you knew Eric and Lyle Menendez in 1986, 87, and up to 89, did you like them?
Very much.
Now, did you ever attend any tennis matches at which either Eric or Lyle Menendez played?
Yes.
Could you tell us on approximately how many occasions, if you recall, you went to tennis matches where either Eric or Lyle Menendez were playing?
Maybe half a dozen.
And were you ever there when Mr. or Mrs. Menendez were present during their son's playing?
Yes.
Were you there when Mr. Menendez was watching his sons play?
Yes.
And were you there when Mrs. Menendez was watching her sons play?
Yes.
Do you remember about when the last time was that you went to a tennis match with either one of the parents?
June of 89.
And do you remember which of the sons was playing?
Lyle was playing my son Steve.
Do you remember where that particular match was?
Arcadia.
Arcadia, California?
Yes.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez react to her sons losing a tennis match?
I saw the reaction. Yes.
And when you say the reaction, is that Mrs. Menendez's reaction?
Both.
Excuse me, is that whose reaction?
Mrs. Menendez's reaction. By both, do you mean Mr. Menendez as well?
Yes.
And in relationship to seeing one of their sons lose a tennis match, how would Mr. Menendez react that you saw?
Fine. Better than most tennis parents react.
And then as to Mrs. Menendez, how did she react?
Just fine.
Now, you didn't know the Menendezes when they lived on the East Coast, is that correct?
No.
Did you ever, pardon me? Oh, I do it, all right. I'm sorry, I did a double negative. Did you know the Menendezes when they lived on the East Coast?
No, I did not.
Thank you. All right. Now, did you ever see any discussions between Mr. Menendez and his son Lyle, which appeared to be heated?
A couple of times in the Calabasas house, they saw discussions.
Could you describe what you actually saw? What were Mr. Menendez doing and what was Lyle Menendez doing?
They were just talking very close, face to face, and just like they were having a very heated conversation, but there was no yelling or any upsetments. It just looked like they were having an intense conversation.
Were you able to hear the actual words uttered?
No,
Did you see anything happen at the conclusion of either of these two discussions?
I just saw Jose pat him on the shoulder, and that was all.
Now, how would you describe Mrs. Menendez in terms of her warmth towards people that she didn't know very well?
She was fine. At the tennis club, the ladies liked to play tennis with her, and she was very well liked.
I'm going to object and move to strike as non-responsive.
Was Mrs. Menendez friendly to strangers?
Yes.
During the time that you were friends with Mrs. Menendez, did she ever tell you about the fact that her husband had had an affair?
Yes.
Did she describe to you anything about what she knew of the affair?
Yes.
What did she tell you?
That she thought it was over and that they were getting along fine now and things were going to be wonderful.
Did she tell you anything about how long the affair had gone on?
Quite a while is all I know.
Did she ever tell you anything more than what you've told us about the affair?
No.
Now, during the period of time that you were friends with the Menendezes, did you ever spend the night in either one of their homes?
Yes.
Could you tell me when that was, please?
May of 89 and June of 89.
And total, how many nights did you spend in the Menendez home?
6.
And during this period of time, were the defendants at the home as well?
Yes.
When was the last time that you saw Mrs. Menendez?
5 days, let's see, August 15th, 1989. I had lunch with her.
Okay, do you remember what day of the week it was?
Tuesday,
All right, and when you had lunch with her, where did you have lunch?
La Trek in Woodland Hills.
Did she come out to the Woodland Hills area?
Yes,
And at the time, were you living in the valley?
yes,
And when you had lunch with her that last time, did you and she make arrangements to have another meeting?
yes.
And when was the next time you were supposed to see Mrs. Menendez?
That Friday night, and if we couldn't make it Friday night, it was to be Sunday night, August 20th.
And did you have any communication with Mrs. Menendez on Saturday, August the 19th, about your plans for the 20th?
On the 20th, I called her from Santa Barbara saying that we couldn't make it to play bridge
You called her on the 20th,
on the 20th,
on Sunday?
Sunday afternoon.
All right, and when you spoke to her on Sunday afternoon and told her that you couldn't make it to play bridge, what did she respond?
She was disappointed and said, you know, even if you get in late, call me from the valley and see if it's not too late. And I said, I thought we'd just be too tired by the time we drove all the way in.
And that was the last time that you ever spoke to her?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Mrs. Farrell, you have talked to the prosecution on a number of occasions, is that correct?
Yes.
You've talked to Detective Zoeller on a number of occasions?
Yes.
You've talked to Mrs. Bazanich on a number of occasions?
Yes.
You've talked to the press previously, haven't you?
No.
You've never talked to the press?
I talked to a writer over the phone and I refused to have lunch with him.
And how long did you talk to him on the phone?
10 minutes.
And who is that writer?
John Johnston
Did you ever talk to Bob Rand?
and Bob Rand, two of them.
Okay, so John Johnson, who's writing one book, and Bob Rand, who's writing another?
Objection calls for hearsay by foundation.
I didn't at the time, and I asked not to have my name used at all. And when they asked to meet me in person, I said no.
But you talked to John Johnson on the phone,
Yes.
who's a writer, is that correct?
Yes, but I didn't know he was writing a book at the time.
What did you think he was writing at the time?
I don't know. I thought he was just writing an article for the paper or for whatever. I thought he used to work for the LA Times.
And you spoke to him for how long on the phone?
Maybe 10 minutes,
And Bob Rand, how long did you speak to him?
15 minutes.
And would you say you've probably talked to the prosecution on 6 or 8 different times?
Just when I've come here.
You were interviewed by them on the 29th of August in 1989. Is that sound
Correct.
right? And you were interviewed by them on the 15th of April, 1989. I'm sorry, the 15th of November, 1989. Detective Zoeller interviewed you twice before you met Mrs. Bazanich. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes.
And then you spoke with Mrs. Bazanich on a number of occasions since then. Is that correct?
Just when I've been here.
Right.
I've been here for 3 days, just briefly, since I've been here.
And when you left here the other day, you hugged Mrs. Bazanich, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm an emotional
Yes.
person. Yes.
Or no? And you hugged Detective Zoeller
Yes.
also, didn't you?
Yes.
And have you refused throughout this entire period of time ever to meet with either Miss Abramson or
Yes, I
I?
have.
And you've refused to meet with our investigator? Is that
Yes.
correct? When you were interviewed first by Detective Zoeller, you gave him some information about Mrs. Menendez and your relationship with her. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you met June 20th, 1993 with Mrs. Bazanich, Mr. Kuriyama, you gave them some information about Mrs. Menendez and your relationship with her. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, have you had a chance to review those reports at all?
No.
do you remember telling Detective Zoeller in 1989 that after Kitty moved to California, you went out to lunch with her every couple of weeks?
I might have said that.
Okay. And then do you remember telling Mrs. Bazanich in November of 1993 that you saw Mrs. Menendez 3 or 4 times a week?
I did see her more often then
You
than
saw
I
her
did
more-
when I first came out. I saw her more that summer than I did when they first moved out here.
But when you were interviewed by Detective Zoeller, you were just talking about the relationship generally, and you said you went out to lunch with her every couple of weeks.
Lunch, but I saw her at other times. We'd play tennis, and sometimes we didn't go to lunch, but I'd see her.
Over
More
the
often.
course of the time that you knew her, would it be fair to say that the amount of time you spent with her varied?
Yeah.
When you spoke to Detective Zoeller in 1989, I believe you indicated that Kitty had asked you to house sit at the Calabasas house with your son Steve.
That's correct.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
And when you were interviewed by Mrs. Bazanich in June, you indicated that the way you ended up in that house was because you and your husband had split up and she offered you a place to live. Is that correct?
It was house sitting.
Was it because you needed a place to stay?
No, I had a place to stay.
And while you were, so you don't remember saying to Mrs. Bazanich that in the early part of 1989, you separated from your husband and Kitty offered you the Calabasas house to live in?
That's true. It was a favor for both of us. I was helping her and she was helping me. I did have another place I could have gone though.
And at that time, you were separated from your husband, whose name was Peter. Is
Yes.
that correct? And you and Mrs. Menendez talked about your relationship. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she encouraged you to not get divorced. Is that correct?
She encouraged me to seek counseling.
Did she encourage you to reconcile with your husband?
If the counseling proved that that was the way it should go, yes.
Did she seem to have a feeling about divorce, that that was an unacceptable solution to marital
I don't
problems?
know.
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall, the answer was that.
When you talked to Detective Zoeller in the fall of 1989, I believe you indicated that Kitty never talked about problems within her family. Do you remember saying that?
Mhm.
Is that fair to say that she was a fairly private person,
When I first met her, yes.
but then that changed?
As we got to know each other, she confided in me more.
Okay, well, when you were talking to Detective Zoeller in November of 1989, you were talking about the relationship overall, weren't you?
I don't know. If I said that she didn't confide in me, I might have just talked about when we first met.
So she did in fact confide in you, is that correct?
Yes.
And she told you about problems in the family, is that
Yes.
correct? And she told you, in fact, about a situation involving Lyle and a girlfriend that he had,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yes.
And what information did she give you in that regard?
That Lyle had gotten a girl pregnant and that Jose was going to probably pay for an abortion.
She said basically Jose was going to take care of it.
She said that he was going to pay for an abortion. And she also said that when...
That's fine, there's no question.
Okay.
When you talked to Mrs. Bazanich in June of 1993, I believe you said that you saw Mrs. Menendez the Wednesday before her death. You've indicated here was Tuesday. Do you remember?
It was the
which day?
15th, whether it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm not...
So the 15th was a Tuesday. And I
Okay.
believe you indicated she was the happiest you'd ever seen her.
That was her exact words to me.
That she was, and did she seem to be the happiest you'd
She
ever
was
seen?
very happy.
Do you remember telling Detective Zoeller in the fall of 1989 that you last went out to lunch with Kitty on Wednesday before their death, and at that lunch, Kitty told you that after the house was completed, they intended to sell it, and she appeared to be upset over having to sell it because she'd spent all of her time in the
Yes.
building of it. Do you remember
She-
that?
Yeah, she loved Calabasas.
So my question is, in June of 93, you're saying she was the happiest you'd ever seen her, and yet when you were interviewed in the fall of 89, you said in fact, at lunchtime, she was very upset because of the idea of
No,
selling the
I didn't
house.
say she was very upset. She was very happy. One of the things that was bothering her is she liked Calabasas. She didn't know if she was going to be happy in Beverly Hills.
Would it refresh your recollection of this report that was written based on your conversation with Detective Zoeller in the fall of 89?
Fine. Karen said that she.
You can read it.
Oh, okay. That's exactly what you just said. She was upset, but I don't mean she was unhappy. I mean, you can be upset and still be happy with your life. If she had a choice of living in Beverly Hills or Calabasas, she would have chosen Calabasas. She liked the area.
But
She was still very happy at that point.
and she was happy with her children,
Yes,
and she was happy with her husband,
yes,
and you knew that she was seeing Dr. Summerfield.
yes, I did.
And you knew that she was seeing Dr. Summerfield the entire time,
Yes,
almost the entire time that you knew her.
yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
And would she talk to you about her
No.
therapy?
No, I just knew that she was going.
And did you know that you saw her on the 15th, on Tuesday? Did you know she had an appointment with Dr. Summerfield on Wednesday,
No, I didn't.
16th?
I didn't know that.
And did she talk to you at all about having been up all night calling her husband and the line being busy and he was away on business and she was obsessed about what he was doing and concerned about whether he was being
she
faithful?
didn't tell me that. She was very happy and relaxed.
In the entire time that you knew her, did she seem to talk about the relationship with her husband as one that was going well?
It was one that she was working on very hard.
But did she seem to think it was going well?
She thought it was going very well that summer.
Did she talk to you about suicidal thoughts that she
No,
had?
never.
May I finish the question, Mrs. Farrell? Did she talk to you about suicidal thoughts she had in 87 or 88?
No,
Did she talk to you about writing suicide letters?
no,
Did she talk to you about taking overdoses and going to the hospital?
no,
Did she talk to you about the entire time she was married having to drink before she could let her husband touch her?
no.
Objection, Your Honor, that calls for hearsay and lack of foundation.
Sustained as to that question, yes.
Did she talk to you about personal facts about her relationship with her husband?
Just that she was working very hard on her marriage and that she loved him.
But she didn't reveal intimate details of how
No.
her relationship worked.
She said that there had been rocky moments and they were trying to work on it. I knew about the affair and she felt that summer of 89 that things were all coming together for her.
That's what she was telling you.
That's what she told me, yes. And I believed it. I had no reason not to.
And she didn't reveal to you that she was telling her therapist very different things.
No, she
Your Honor,
didn't.
same fact, not evidence.
Sustained, the answer straight.
Did she talk to you about going to New York to track Louise, the girlfriend?
No,
Did she talk to you about photographing her?
no,
Did she talk to you about calling her and keeping her on the phone hours at a time?
Objection,
No.
same fact, not evidence, move to strike.
Sustained, the answer.
Would it be fair to say that she was fairly private?
yes,
Objection, call for conclusion.
Overall, the answer is yes.
And, I'm sorry, your answer is yes, she was quite private?
yes.
Did she have any other close friends besides you?
She had friends at the tennis club.
Anybody who seemed to be any closer than you?
No, she didn't have a lot of time. She was very busy.
So was it your impression that you were as close to her as anybody else?
Yes,
You played tennis with her?
yes,
Was she competitive?
yes.
Did she like to win?
Sure.
Did it matter to her if she won or lost?
No, she liked to win, but didn't matter that much if I won or she won.
And I believe your testimony is that it didn't matter to either her or her husband whether her children won or lost at tennis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They didn't care at all.
No, they didn't care. They just liked them to play well.
And do you think,
Examination on behalf of the other defendant, Eric Menendez.
Yes, ma'am.
oh, can we have that back?
Thank you. Did you feel, Mrs. Farrell, that the district attorney did not want you to talk to the defense in this case?
No,
Did you instruct your ex-husband, Peter, to deliver that message to us?
no,
Were you present when our investigator tried to talk to you and basically your current husband, Mr. Farrell, prevented the conversation?
he did not prevent it. I told her I didn't choose to talk with her.
I see. Now, I'm a little confused about dates. In 1989, you told Detective Zoeller, did you not, that you last saw Mrs. Menendez on the Wednesday, August 16th, correct? Do you remember telling him that?
I don't remember that. If I said the 16th, I meant it was 5 days before the 20th. I know that.
I'm asking if in 89 you remember telling Detective Zoeller that you saw her on Wednesday.
I don't remember saying the 16th.
Okay. How about on October 25th, 1993, telling him you last saw Kitty on Wednesday, August 16th?
I don't remember saying the 16th.
Okay, so again, you don't remember that.
No.
Now, when was it that you claim some plans were made with Mrs. Menendez for you and your husband to visit them?
Objection argument.
Rephrase the question.
When was it that these plans were made to visit with them that week?
They were made at lunch
At lunch on which day?
on the 15th
And what was the plan?
to play bridge
Yes, to play bridge when?
on either Friday night, or if we couldn't make it Friday night, to play on Sunday night.
And could you make it Friday night?
No.
So where did you leave? Well, where did you leave it with Mrs. Menendez that Tuesday?
That I would call her from Santa Barbara on Sunday to let her know if we could make it down.
No. You said that the plan on Tuesday was that you'd either play bridge on Friday or on
Right.
Sunday, right?
Yes, and I said if we can't make it Friday, I was going to call her if we could make it Friday. If I didn't call her, I was going to call her on Sunday.
Okay. So is it your testimony then that the understanding was if I don't call you, that means we'll be there Sunday?
Right.
And then, so that's where it was, that you would be there Sunday. That's where it was in your mind for the rest of that week.
Right.
And then it was only on Sunday then that you realized you couldn't be there Sunday, so you called her to say, no, we're not coming
Correct.
tonight. I take it then that you had no contact with her between Tuesday and Sunday.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
You're sure of that?
Yes.
You're sure of that, are you not, as the statement you made that it didn't matter to her and Jose if their sons won or lost? Is that right?
Sustain.
Are you as certain of that fact as of the other fact?
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Are you certain that you had no contact with her, as you just testified?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're also certain, are you not, that it did not matter in that family if the children won or lost? Is that right?
Correct.
Your Honor, I have an exhibit, which is a Pacific Bell telephone bill. You had a telephone when you lived at the Calabasas house, did you not?
Yes.
And the number there was 818-884-4764?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
No.
You remember that it was a Pacific Bell account?
Yes.
I know. I'd like to mark this next in order, Your Honor.
386.
And it consists for the record of 6 pages.
need a moment, please, Your Honor.
While counsel is looking at that, Mrs. Farrell, on October 25th, 1993, did you tell Detective Zoeller that you called Mrs. Menendez on Saturday, August 19th, before you went to Santa Barbara?
I don't remember that.
Don't you remember telling him that late in the week of August 15th, you and your husband Edward decided to spend Sunday in Santa Barbara? And so you called Kitty on Saturday to tell her that you were going to spend Sunday in Santa Barbara and to tell her that you couldn't therefore see them Sunday night.
I don't remember. I just remember I called her from Santa Barbara on Sunday. I don't remember saying that I was going to call her Saturday.
Well, would it refresh your recollection if I show you Detective Zoeller's report in which he writes that indeed you told him that?
Well, I must have said it then.
Well, let me show you the report. Can I approach with this first?
Yes.
I'm going to call your attention to this last paragraph. If you would just read that to yourself. Now, does it appear that a month or so ago you told Detective Zoeller that you made a call before you went to Santa Barbara on Saturday the 19th?
It appears that I said that.
And in fact, that was before you went to Santa Barbara the 19th.
If I might have called Saturday, but I know that I called Sunday too.
Okay. Well, what would you have said on Saturday that would have necessitated your calling on Sunday?
I don't know. Maybe that we were going to try to make it, that I didn't know how long we were going to stay in Santa Barbara.
Let me now show you 386. Why don't you look through this telephone bill and see if you recognize from the number it's called that it's your telephone bill.
Yes.
It is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's your telephone bill for the month of August 1989, correct?
Correct.
And that's a time when you were living at the Menendez's Calabasas house that was still somewhat under construction, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you remember the telephone for the Menendez Beverly Hills house?
No.
Can
I see it here. I don't remember it.
you see it? You recognize it?
I see a Beverly Hills phone number.
Well, let me, if I could, see the page that you're looking at. Let me call your attention to this, which is numbered page 3 by the telephone company, and ask you to look at, starting with item 16. You see that number 16 under
Yes.
item? And that appears to be August 10th, 2:37 p.m. The number called is 213-285-0052. That's a Beverly Hills number, correct?
Correct.
And if I were to tell you there are already records in this case that indicate that that is the number at the Menendez home, would that refresh your recollection?
Fine.
Okay. Now you see there's also a telephone call here on August 14th to the same number.
No, August 14th is North Hollywood.
Well, maybe it helps if we do this. There you see the 10th,
Right.
and then you see the 14th.
No, the 14th is way up here. This is the 17th.
Mrs. Farrell, you're getting confused by item number. Forget item number.
Okay.
Let's look at date, okay? See August under the
Okay.
date line?
Right, Beverly Hills.
Okay, let's do one at a time. Take a breath. Okay,
I'm fine.
okay. August 14th, you see that entry?
Mm-hmm.
9:55 in the morning, right?
Right.
Under time, 8 minutes.
Mhm.
correct? To the Menendez home,
Mhm.
correct? Now let's go to, now you just testified that you didn't speak to Kitty again after lunch on the 15th until Sunday, the 20th. You recall just testifying to that?
I thought that I hadn't, but apparently I called, or someone from that number called. We
Yep.
had a lot of kids at the Calabasas house that could have called that number. I don't remember calling her after that luncheon.
Well, let's just see what's on the phone bill. August 17th, 1:29 PM, 4 minutes to the main number at the Menendez house.
Right?
Now, were you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez had his own number at that house?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
That Eric Menendez had his own number,
I wasn't aware of that.
and that's the number they gave out to their friends.
I wasn't.
Lack of foundation.
Just aim the answer is stricken.
Now, you don't remember talking to Kitty Menendez on
No,
August 17th?
no, I don't.
Well, let's go to the 18th then. You see August 18th at 8:14 in the morning, a 2-minute call to that same phone number in Beverly Hills.
I don't remember calling her.
Well, I'm not asking if you do, I'm just asking.
Yes, I do see it.
And you don't remember talking to her on Friday.
No, my recollection was calling her from Santa Barbara.
Okay, well, let's go down to another entry for Friday, August 18th at 6:30 at night, 6 minutes. Now, that's again to the same number, the Menendez family number, is that correct?
Yes.
Now let's keep looking here. Do you see a call on Saturday, August 19th to her house?
No.
No.
But I called from Santa Barbara, and I
You
didn't,
weren't in Santa Barbara on the 19th, is that correct?
we were in Santa Barbara on the 20th.
Right. But it's on the 19th that you told Detective Zoeller 1 month ago that you called Mrs. Menendez. We just showed you
Right.
before.
I could have been mistaken on the dates.
Yes.
Amy Director.
Just a couple questions. The phone bill that you've just been shown is for a phone number that's an 818 area code, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What is the area code for Santa Barbara? Is it 805?
805.
All right. And do you specifically recall here today that when you called Mrs. Menendez to tell her that you wouldn't be on the 20th, where did you call her from?
From Santa Barbara.
Thank you, Anna.
Looking for the.
All right, thank you. May step down. You're excused. Your next witness.
Just one answer.
All right.
Did you ever tell either Detective Zoeller, before you took the stand to testify, did you ever tell either Detective Zoeller or Mrs. Bazanich that the only phone call you remember was on the 20th on the Sunday from Santa Barbara?
I didn't say that before I took the stand. No.
Okay, so you said it for the first time on the witness stand.
That's just what what I have remembered since this all started.
Well, that's what you remembered on the witness stand, is that correct?
Objection.
No.
Argumentative and vague.
Okay. Let's,
I remembered this before. This is the first time I'm saying it.
so you didn't tell Mrs. Bazanich even though you've been here, 3 times before?
I haven't talked with her since I've been here.
You just hug her when you come, you don't talk to her?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Nothing further.
Thank you. You may step down. You're excused. Your next witness.
Uncle Palmer, I can work. Ms. Eisenberg, did you know Jose Menendez?
Yes,
And were you his either secretary or personal assistant at the time of his death?
yes.
What was your job title?
Excuse me?
What was your job title?
Besides office wife, assistant to the chairman of the board.
All right, and you worked at Live Entertainment, is that correct?
Yes.
When was it that you first met Mr. Menendez?
In 1976 at Hertz Corporation.
And at the time, both of you were working at Hertz, is that correct?
Yes.
And at the time that you first met him, were you working for him or just you both worked for the same company?
No, we both worked in the same division.
And of the 14 years that you knew Mr. Menendez, how many of those years did you actually work for him?
Between probably 6 and 8 years, 7 and 8 years, I'd have to really sit down and figure it out. You know,
When Mr. Menendez moved to California to take another job, did you come to California to work for him?
yes, I did.
And was that in 1986?
Yes, it was.
And between 1986 and 1989, did you return to the New York area for a period of time and
Yes.
then come back?
Yes.
Approximately when was it that you left and came back?
I left, I believe it was April 2nd or 1st, or the last day in March, and returned to work April 25th.
Was that if the same year?
No, 89.
right, so you left in 88,
in 88, returned in 89.
so you were gone approximately a year.
Right.
And when you came back, you continued to work for Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
Would you describe how Mr. Menendez treated you?
Objection, Your Honor, relevant.
It's vague as to what you mean. Why don't you rephrase the question?
Was Mr. Menendez abusive towards you when you worked for him?
Not at all.
Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Overall.
Pardon me?
Not at all.
Right. Did you ever see him in meetings where he was hard on other people or abusive towards other people?
Hard, yes.
And did you ever say anything to him about it?
Once in a while, not always, if I thought he was a little tough and if the situation would lend itself to my saying something. Otherwise, I didn't.
Okay, but you did on occasion say something to him, is that?
Yes.
Okay. And during the period of time that he worked for you, would you describe his work habits? Excuse me, I said he worked for you. During the period of time that you worked for him.
Sometimes people thought that, yes.
Okay, but during the period of time that you worked for him, what were his work habits like? Let's just limit your testimony to when he was in California. Was he lazy?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the question on relevance and vagueness.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Okay, Mr. Roger Smith came in and testified. Do you know Mr. Smith?
Yes, I do.
All right. And was Mr. Menendez a lazy person?
Not at all.
Object against the form of the questioning.
I can make
The
an.
previous reference is not a question.
All right, it's vague as to what you're referring to, so objection sustained, the answer stricken.
All right. How many hours a day did Mr. Menendez work?
Well, he usually started, not every day, most days. He would have a breakfast meeting about 8:30 out of the office, would then come into the office, would have many meetings after hours, would go to screenings after hours, and then dinner with the people he was with. So you could say his day started around 8 or 8:30, and on many, many occasions ended after 9 o'clock at night.
Did Mr. Menendez have a sense of humor?
Objection, Your Honor, relevant.
Overall.
Absolutely. A very good sense of humor.
Was he a tough CEO?
Yes, he was. He wasn't running a day camp. He was running a company, and he was tough.
Now, as his assistant, did you answer his telephone?
Yes.
And did he have a lot of women calling who appeared to be girlfriends
Question is vague as the time.
during the time that you worked for him?
14 years.
I'm sorry, I think I've limited her testimony to California.
All right, why don't you do it again?
Okay,
He appeared to be girlfriend's the conclusion of the
Overall.
right. During the period of time that you worked for Mr. Menendez here in California at Live, excluding the year that you were in New York, did it appear, you answered his phone, right?
I was the only one who answered his phone.
And did it appear to you that there were a string of women calling who appeared to be girlfriends versus business associates?
Not at all.
Okay. You were aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez had had an affair during the course of his marriage?
Yes.
Now, after Mr. and Mrs. Menendez died, did you go to the memorial service in California?
Yes.
And at the memorial service, did Lyle Menendez speak?
Yes, he did.
Can you describe the kinds of things he spoke about?
I object to this.
Not to approach her.
All right.
Ms. Eisenberg, did you consider Jose Menendez to be a lazy worker?
Not at all.
Did he work you hard?
Well,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. It's irrelevant.
Sustain, let's move on.
Ms. Eisenberg, did you attend the memorial service in Princeton as well as the memorial service in California?
yes.
And at the memorial service at Princeton, did Lyle Menendez speak on behalf of his parents?
Yes.
Did Lyle Menendez speak lovingly of his father during that memorial service?
Yes, in fact,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Eisenberg, you knew Mrs. Menendez, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you spend time with Mrs. Menendez after the family moved to California?
Yes, I did.
Would you say you spent more time with her before you went back to New York or after you returned in April of '89?
Well, before we had more time.
And did you like Mrs. Menendez?
Very much.
What kind of activities briefly did you do with her in that period of time between 1986 and when you returned to New York in April of '88?
We had several lunches. We went out to dinner on occasion. I went to screenings with her on occasion. We went shopping, things for the office.
Now, during the period of time that you knew Mrs. Menendez between 1986 and 1989, did you ever hear her use abusive or profane language?
Never, never.
Now, I take it that if you were the only person who answered the phone for Mr. Menendez, that you answered the phone on occasion when his wife would call. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever answer the phone when it appeared to you that Mrs. Mrs. Menendez's speech was slurred?
Yes.
Were you ever aware of were you aware of what that was caused from?
I felt it was either, my feeling was it was probably pills, but I had no way of knowing.
All right. Now, when this would occur and she would call and her speech was slurred, would you notify Mr. Menendez of that fact?
Absolutely.
Did you ever go driving in a car where Mrs. Menendez was the driver?
Usually when we went out, she was the driver. In fact,
And,
probably always when we went out.
and when she drove, did you ever fear for your life because of her driving?
Not at all.
Now, do you remember what day was the last day that you saw Mr. Menendez alive?
Well, it would have been in that Friday before they were killed.
And
Move to strike the answer, Your Honor. I think beyond personal knowledge.
Overruled.
Would have been.
Overruled.
It was that Friday.
now, when Mr. Menendez came to work, was he always in the same mood, or could you tell if he was in a bad mood?
Oh, I could tell.
All right. And do you have any specific recollection about Mr. Menendez being in a bad mood the last day that you saw him?
No, to what I recall of that day, it was like every other day he was fine.
So there was nothing out of the ordinary that you noticed about his mood on August the 18th of 1989. Is that
Not
correct?
at all. Nothing.
Now, did Mr. Menendez ever brag to you about his son's achievements in tennis?
Not brag, but he was very proud when they did well, and he was very upbeat, and he would talk about it, and not so much bragging as just being pleased with the fact that they did well.
Did you like Mr. Menendez?
Very much.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Ms. Eisenberg, you told us here your name is Marlene, but everybody calls you Marzi, don't they?
Right.
Okay. There's been other witnesses who have testified about this Marzi person. I wanted to just establish it's you. I'd like to take you back, if I can, to when you first met Mr. Menendez in 1976. You said you worked for Hertz then?
Yes.
And were you a secretary at that time?
Yes.
And who was your boss?
Well, when I started, or at the point that
When you met Mr. Menendez?
I was working with the controller, Bob Kelly.
And how long did Mr. Menendez work for Hertz before he was moved to RCA?
I don't know exactly how long.
Well, did you ever become his secretary while he worked at Hertz?
Yes.
And when was that?
I think the end of 79.
And did he have another secretary at that time as well?
Yes.
And was that Mr. John Peduto?
Yes.
And was Mr. Peduto his secretary in 1976, 77, and 78?
Yes.
And did you and Mr. Peduto sort of become Mr. Menendez's dual secretaries?
Yes.
And how long was it that he had two secretaries?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, are you aware of the fact that the affair that Mrs. Menendez ultimately learned of began during the time that both you and Mr. Peduto were Mr. Menendez's secretaries?
Yes.
And where was Mr. Menendez working at the time that this affair, as far as you know, first started?
I believe it hurts.
And do you know what year it was that it started?
No, I don't recall.
But when did he leave Hertz for RCA?
I think 80, 81, around 81, I believe.
And when he left Hertz Hertz was owned by RCA, is that
Yes.
correct? And he left Hertz after Mr. Joe Vittoria became president of the company?
Which company?
Hertz.
I think it was about that time.
And there was like a nasty turf war going on between Mr. Menendez and Mr. Victoria, and Mr. Menendez lost. Isn't that true?
Objection, calls for hearsay, lack of foundation, assumes fact not in evidence.
Sustained, it's also irrelevant.
Isn't it true that at every place that Mr. Menendez worked, he had personal conflicts with the people on his same level or whose jobs he was after?
Objection, calls for conclusion and argumentative.
Well, it does call for conclusion on the part of the witness. You have to rephrase the question.
Well, let me start back then. You remember when Joe Vittoria became the boss at Hertz?
Vaguely.
And you remember there was conflict between him and Mr. Menendez?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained. Let's move on to something more contemporary.
Well, I have to do it chronologically. Do you then remember that Mr. Frank Olson, who was the chairman of the board, moved Mr. Menendez from Hertz to RCA?
Objection, calls for hearsay and irrelevant.
Sustained. Let's, as I said, get to something more contemporary.
Did you move with Mr. Menendez to RCA?
Not at that point.
Did Mr. Peduto move with him to RCA?
Yes, he did.
And did you ultimately join Mr. Menendez at RCA?
Yes, I did.
And when did you join him at RCA?
83.
So there was a period of a couple of years when you didn't work for him in there.
I think it was not quite 2 years.
And to the best of your knowledge, all through that time from 79 through 83, Mr. Peduto did remain as Mr. Menendez's secretary.
Yes.
Now, when did you become aware of the fact that your boss was having an affair?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
I don't even recall when. I couldn't answer that.
Was it during the time that Mr. Peduto was also a secretary for Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Peduto remained Mr. Menendez's secretary until what year?
I think it was late 85. He retired. I really don't remember the date. 85.
About 6 months before Mr. Menendez left RCA?
Probably. Give or take a few. I don't remember when.
Okay, and you remained as Mr. Menendez's secretary after Mr. Peduto retired?
Yes.
And then Mr. Menendez left RCA when?
86.
And he left RCA, did he not, after Elliot Goldman became head of RCA, replacing Bob Summers?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
And isn't it true that Mr. Menendez hoped that he would replace Bob Summers and then proceeded to have a turf war with Elliot Goldman?
Objection, assumes fact.
Sustained. It's irrelevant. Let's move on to something else.
Now, in 1986, when did Mr. Menendez leave RCA?
Well, it would have been, he came out to California, I believe it was July, so, May or June, I guess it was. Something in that time frame. I don't remember exactly when.
Do you remember when the Menendez family, Kitty and Jose and Eric, moved to California?
Well, when you say moved, do you mean totally moved or traveled back and forth moved? I don't know when they sold their house in Jersey.
Okay, well, let's just back up. At some point, all three of them were here living together in some sort of residence, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And was
Yes.
it your understanding their first place of abode here was in Oakwood Apartments?
Yes.
And do you know when they leased or moved into the Oakwood Apartments?
Objection, vague as to vague.
Overruled.
Well, that was very early on in 86 when they came out here, when he started. I would say probably July, August,
So
September. I don't think it was beyond that.
sometime in July or August is when the family leased the Oakwood
I
Apartments.
think so, within a few months.
And then it took some time, a month or two, before the furniture came out.
I don't recall when the furniture came out.
Do you recall when they first rented the house in Calabasas, the rented
Calabasas.
house?
It seemed like they were in Oakwood forever, although I don't think that was the case.
It feels that way living in Oakwood, though.
It did.
Yeah.
But
Okay, so you don't know how long they were living in Oakwood before they found a house to rent.
I really don't remember the time frame. It wasn't that, it was in 6 months, I guess. I don't know exactly when.
And now, you remember, do you not, that Eric enrolled at Calabasas High School?
Yes.
Is it your recollection that he enrolled at the start of the school year, the fall of '86?
I think so. Yeah, I would say so.
In fact, weren't there times, Ms. Eisenberg, when you would take Eric to school before he had his driver's license?
No, I didn't take him. I would pick him up. Yes.
And were there times you pick him up from tennis?
Yes.
And when you picked him up, if you can remember, where'd you take him home to?
I'd pick him up. We'd pick up lunch. He'd come back to the office. Sometimes I took him, I think, to tennis. I don't remember exactly.
And when he'd come back to the office, would Mr. Menendez be there?
Yeah, generally he was in a meeting, and that's why I was picking him up.
And was there a space set aside in the office for Eric to do homework or schoolwork at?
Yes, we had some vacant area, another office.
And he would do his work there?
I believe so.
And then sometimes you take him from there to a tennis lesson?
As I recall, yeah, I remember picking him up at tennis, and I'm pretty sure I took him on several occasions. It was not an everyday occurrence, so I didn't concentrate on it.
Do you remember ever taking him home at the end of the day?
Where would I have taken him? I just don't remember.
Okay, let's go back though now to the beginning of the affair. You're not sure when you first learned of it, correct?
Right.
And did the mistress, if you will, have a code name at the office?
Yes.
And what was her code name?
Lou Miller.
Loumiller?
Yes.
And who told you who Lou Miller was?
Your Honor, I object to this as being irrelevant beyond the scope of the.
Overruled as to that question.
I would think it was probably John Peduto.
And did you ever discuss Lou Miller with Jose Menendez?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
What time frame are we talking about?
At any time.
Out here
Is that yes in California?
in California.
Okay. And were you led to believe by Mr. Menendez that Lou Miller or Louise Maloney was no longer in his life when he was here in California?
Yes.
So during the time that he was having this affair with this woman, he never discussed it with you? Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Now, do you know if Mr. Peduto had the task of making arrangements for Mr. Menendez to see or spend time with Lou Miller?
Objection irrelevant, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Did you ever make arrangements for Mr. Menendez to see or spend time with or travel with Louise Maloney?
No.
Irrelevant.
Overruled, the answer will stand.
Now, you became aware, did you not, Ms. Eisenberg, that when in California, Kitty Menendez learned of this affair?
Yes.
Now, you don't know exactly when it was Kitty learned it, whether she learned it before she came to California or after, do you?
I'm not sure.
But you found out that she knew about it when they were living in California.
Yes.
And how did you find out?
Jose told me.
Did you ever discuss Jose's affair with Kitty?
No.
Did you notice a change in Kitty after they moved to California, an emotional change?
Well, I didn't spend any time with her in New York, so I wasn't that much aware of her behavior there.
So you'd never spend time with her in New York, is that?
We spoke a lot.
On the
And-
phone?
Yes. So to me, there was a change in the tone in the conversations and her behavior.
Okay, so you did notice a change in California. Did she seem upset, depressed,
Upset. Troubled.
troubled? Did she seem obsessive?
Objection calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Did you see her participate in behavior that you characterized as obsessive?
Yes.
And would you describe what the behavior was that you thought was obsessive?
Checking phone logs or a Rolodex or looking through a desk.
Phone logs, we're talking about home or the office?
The office.
And whose phone logs was she checking?
Mine.
And were those logs that recorded the telephone calls coming to her husband?
Yes.
And when you say she was checking a desk, was she checking your desk or his?
Well, his desk. I don't think she would have gone through my desk.
And did she indicate to you what she was looking for?
Not really, no.
And did you think you knew what she was looking for?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustain.
Was there a rule in the office that Mr. Menendez imposed about how to maintain the telephone log so as not to have Mrs. Menendez know when any female called?
Well, it was not so much his rule as something I did. He was very concerned about her not getting upset. So I would use only initials for most people.
So if phone calls came in, you would just put the initials down?
Well, first initial.
Okay. And was that because Mrs. Menendez came in frequently and you never knew when she would be going through the desk or looking at the phone logs?
Yes.
And would you say she came in at least 2-3 times a week?
No, I don't think so. It
Once a week?
depended upon what was going on.
How often did you see her doing this searching, this obsessive behavior?
Certainly not every visit. In the beginning, when she first found out, it was more often. That seemed to taper off also as time went by.
Now, you then left for an entire year, April 88 to April 89, is that correct?
Yes,
And did you see Mrs. Menendez at all after you came back in April of 89?
I did. She came up to the office to see me.
When was that?
The day I got back, April 25th.
Did you see her again after that?
Probably.
Do you have any recollection of it?
She was up the office. I remember her wearing white slacks and a white shirt. And she came up. I can't pinpoint it. It wasn't out of the ordinary.
Was that a day that she searched for phone
No,
records or anything? Or did she?
No, I don't remember that behavior when I returned.
Now, did you know whether or not she was in therapy?
I knew that she was.
And did you know whether or not Mr. Menendez had actually gone and seen the therapist with her?
Objection, beyond the scope and irrelevant.
Overruled.
I believe I was aware of it.
Did he ever indicate to you in California that there had actually been other affairs that his wife still didn't know about?
Not that I was aware of. No, he never indicated anything to me.
And did you know a woman named Ruth Robinson?
At RCA.
Yes, you knew her when Mr. Menendez
Name.
worked at RCA?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know her. I spoke to her on the phone.
Did she work at RCA or was she someone that he knew when he worked at RCA?
No, she was either, and I don't remember whether she worked for the Hollywood Reporter or she represented someone. She had something to do with the industry, the record industry.
And when Mr. Menendez was at RCA, at least in the last few years, he was in the record division, correct?
Yes.
How many times did you visit their home when the Menendezes lived on the East Coast?
Not at all.
How many times did you see their children engage in sports activities when the Menendezes lived on the East Coast?
How often did I see them?
Yes.
I didn't.
And with respect to the West Coast, you said that's when you actually started to see Mrs. Menendez rather than just talk to her on the telephone. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Did you ever visit the home in Beverly Hills?
No, I was away when they moved into the house.
And between April and August, you didn't have any occasion to go there. Is that correct?
That's right.
And did you visit the home in Calabasas, the rented house?
Yes.
Just for clarity, they never moved into the house they bought in Calabasas.
No, they didn't.
Did you ever go to that house, though, while it was under renovation construction?
Yes.
And did that house seem to take up a lot of Mrs. Menendez's time?
Objection, politics, speculation.
Sustained.
Now, you've testified to Mr. Menendez's work hours. Did you, were you familiar with whether or not Mrs. Menendez would call him often to talk about what to have for dinner?
Objection, Vegas to time.
Be a little more specific.
We're talking California.
What to have for dinner? No, she called frequently. I spoke with her every day.
Would she call about dinner?
Not that I'm aware of. You know.
Would you say that the last 2 years he went home after work rather than off doing other things?
Well, he went home or he went to meetings outside the office and then went home, or they went to screenings.
And how many weekends did he work?
None that I'm aware of.
And
Or,
isn't-
wait, excuse me. On occasion, there might be a Saturday morning if someone was coming into town who we had to meet with. Otherwise, he didn't work weekends.
And wasn't that unusual in the entertainment business for a big executive not to work weekends?
Objection, irrelevant, recommendation.
Overruled.
Can you repeat that, please?
Isn't it unusual in the entertainment industry for the head of an entertainment company, which he was, to not be working on weekends?
Unusual? I don't
Yes.
know. I don't know. I couldn't answer that. I don't know what other people do.
Okay. And you said that his day started at 8 or 8:30, but that's only if he had a breakfast meeting, correct?
Which was frequent.
By the way, what happened to his calendars from live entertainment?
I probably threw them out at some point.
Did you give them to Detective Zoeller before you threw them out?
Did I give them to him? They were there. Many people looked at them.
My question is, did you specifically make them available to Detective Zoeller?
They were available to him, yes.
Did you know if he copied them?
I don't recall. I don't know.
But it's your recollection that you wound up having them and threw them away?
I would have thrown them out at the point that I cleaned out everything, which was 7, 8, 9 months, a year later, when I emptied out files and things. If they were still in the office at that point, I would have presumed that no one needed them any longer.
But you don't really remember doing that, do you?
Doing what?
Throwing them away.
I think I did.
Okay. Do you think you know when?
It would have been down, quite some time later.
Now, you were the one who would keep track of it. You would make the entries in his calendar, correct?
Yes.
They'd be in your handwriting.
For the most part, yes.
All right. When he was at RCA, did he have those big red calendar books with the year stamped on the outside?
He did.
They were called Standard something or another. Did he have the same kind of calendar book at Live?
I think so.
Let's assume, hypothetically, that there were weekdays when Mr. Menendez did not have breakfast meetings. What time would he get to the office?
10.
And let's assume, hypothetically, that there were evenings, as I'm sure there were there not, where there were no screenings or dinner appointments.
Right.
And what time would he go home?
6:30.
So there were
Thereabout.
days where his workday was 10 to 6:30.
On occasion.
And did he not traveled to tennis tournaments that his sons were participating in? Correct?
Yes.
And were you familiar with the practice of traveling, for example, to the Easter Bowl every spring?
Where is it held?
The Doral in Miami.
In Miami. Every spring, I don't know.
Were you aware that in the spring of 1989, Mr. Menendez was at the Doral in Miami?
I knew he was in Florida. I had no way of knowing where he was. I wasn't working with him.
That was the time that when you were negotiating to come back, is that correct?
Right.
And that's how you knew where he was, because he wasn't?
I just knew he was in Florida.
And were you aware that he took vacations in August to attend the National Tennis Championships in Kalamazoo?
What year?
Some years. I'm not sure all of them.
I don't remember. I'm sure that may have happened. I couldn't answer that.
Let's talk about 1989.
He did go to Kalamazoo on occasion, yes.
All right, let's talk about 1989. Were you aware of the fact that he went to San Francisco in July for a tournament of Eric's? For a week.
I don't remember.
Do you remember in July, late in July, that he went to Louisville for another week for Eric's tennis tournament?
No, I don't remember at all.
And do you remember Kalamazoo in August of 1989 for yet another week?
No.
Was it Mr. Menendez's practice, both when he worked in New York and here in California, to take a winter vacation, usually a ski vacation?
I remember him taking vacation, going to Mexico. I think ski vacations.
And do you recall that he would also take summer vacations?
Yes.
As Mr. Menendez's personal assistant, did you attend meetings with the other executives of Live?
No, I attended meetings at RCA with him, but not at Live. I didn't have time for that.
So the meetings that he had at Live, you would arrange them, but you wouldn't attend them. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, you said that Mr. Menendez had a sense of humor.
Yes.
And isn't it true that one large feature of his sense of humor was at other people's expense?
No, I don't think so.
So you would disagree with his family members who testified that he would belittle people and make fun of them?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
You never saw him belittling people and laughing at them and putting them down and laughing about it?
Laughing about it? No, not at all.
Did you ever see him pull practical jokes that were embarrassing to the subjects of them?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall.
No, I don't recall ever seeing him do that.
Did you ever see him or know him to, at parties, tell people falsely that his wife had cancer so they would treat her peculiarly?
I was not at parties with him.
Did you ever know that that was one of his practical jokes?
I've never heard that before.
Did you ever see him silence Kitty with a move of his hand? Kitty! Like that.
Never.
You understand there are numerous witnesses who testified in this case who say they saw that routinely.
Excuse me, that's an argumentative.
Sustained.
So you're saying, would you say that he never did that, or just that you never saw it?
In my presence, I never saw that.
Was it your impression from your contact, from your seeing them interact, that Mrs. Menendez was afraid of her husband?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall.
Not at all.
Did you ever have any reason to believe that he was afraid of her?
What do you mean by afraid? He was concerned about her.
Was he, well, let me ask you this. Was he afraid she was going to go off the deep end?
Yes.
And what was the deep end?
My interpretation, I think she would get extremely upset, possibly threaten to commit suicide. I don't really know what went on in their home. He was very concerned about her not getting upset.
Did he ever explain why he was so concerned about her not getting upset?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Overall.
Well, I can't remember exact conversations, but in talking with Kitty and with him at different times, she was going through a very bad period in her life. And I think it took very little to set her off.
Okay, but why did Jose care? It was your opinion, was it not, that he didn't love her?
I think he cared about her.
So he didn't want her to kill herself?
I don't think he wanted her to kill herself, no.
You don't think he wanted the embarrassment either, do you?
I don't think embarrassment had anything to do with it.
Let me ask you this. Ms. Eisenberg, you testified that you went to the memorial service in Princeton, correct?
Yes,
And you also went to the memorial service in Los Angeles, correct?
yes,
And it's true, is it not, that a number of limousines were used in both places to take family and coworkers and others to and from various sites of the services? Is that true?
Well, I'd say probably mostly family. I think coworkers had their own cars.
Okay. You rode in a limousine, however, in Los Angeles.
Only for a particular reason.
Okay.
Which
But
was
you
to-
did you not?
Yes,
ride in a limousine?
yes.
All right. Now, I want to ask you this. Do you remember at any of these, on either the occasion in Los Angeles or in Princeton, being in a limousine with Martha Cano?
I really don't.
You knew Martha Connor, did you?
Yes,
You knew she was Jose's sister?
yes,
You knew she was a stockbroker?
yes.
Your Honor, may we approach for a moment?
All right.
Now, you said that there were some times when the situation was appropriate, when you would speak to him about his treatment of other people. Is that right?
Not so much speak to him, make a comment or something. That wasn't very often.
And were there times when you felt you could not say anything? It would be unwelcome.
I choose to say inappropriate. He was running a company. It wasn't my place to correct him.
Even if you thought what he was doing was
It
wrong.
wasn't my place to correct him.
Do you know, by the way, if Kuroko issued a commemorative Rambo knife to its executives?
I'm not aware of that.
You didn't get one.
I never heard of it.
Okay. Did you ever see a Rambo poster with Mr. Menendez's face on it?
Sustained. Objection sustained.
Ms. Eisenberg, do you recall on November 21st, 1993, you were interviewed by Mrs. Bozanich and Detective Zoeller? Do you
I'm
remember?
sorry, what was the date?
It was November 21st, 1993, last week. I know, it seems like a long time ago.
A lifetime ago.
A
Yes.
lifetime ago. Okay, but you remember being interviewed by them?
Excuse me?
Do you remember being interviewed by them?
We spoke.
Well, it wasn't in the form of an interview where they took notes when they
Yes.
Okay. And did you tell them that Kitty didn't like to be alone and that for the last 2 years, Jose went home after work?
No, Jose didn't like to be alone, which was my impression. I don't know about Kitty's behavior with
Okay.
regards to that.
So Jose didn't like to be alone, and for the last 2 years, he went home after work. Is that what you told them?
Yes, if they didn't have a screening, he went, as far as I knew, he went home.
Okay. And did you also tell them that Kitty would call about dinner?
Kitty called every day.
Okay.
About dinner, I don't know.
Now, did you think when when you worked with Jose in New York, that if he didn't have a nighttime meeting, he was also going home?
Sustained.
I have nothing further at this point.
All right, examination by Lyle Menendez.
Ms. Eisenberg, did you say that at some point Jose Menendez was very nervous about Kitty going off the deep end? Is that what you said?
Yes.
When was it that he was very nervous about her going off the deep end?
He didn't want her to become upset over, anything that she might think would upset her. I don't, items. When? 87, 86.
And you were in New York between March of 88 and April of 89, correct?
Yes.
When you came back to California in April of 89, did you notice a change in Mrs. Menendez's physical appearance? Did she seem to have changed during the 14 months that you were away?
No, not to me. She looked the same.
And did you notice anything different in her behavior
I
from
didn't.
when you were there before?
Well, I didn't really get an opportunity to spend time with her. When I came back, a lot of things were happening in the company. I was extremely busy, and before we really had any amount of time together, she was killed.
Now, you said on direct examination that although Jose Menendez was not abusive toward you, he was hard on others. Do you recall that testimony?
All right.
And can you give me an example of how he was hard on others?
Again, if he felt someone was not telling him a straight story or giving him the truth or was, trying to candy coat something, he would push for answers.
And do you remember when you had a conversation with Miss Bozanich and Detective Zoeller on November 21st, 1993, that you told them that Jose Menendez had few friends and that he exercised control on everyone in the office.
No, I said he had few friends, many acquaintances, and that he had a finger on everything that was happening in the office, not control.
And if they wrote that down, that is not
No,
what
I,
you said.
I pointed it out. That wasn't, it was a finger on everything.
Now, is it true that Jose Menendez hated change around him?
Calls for speculation on part of the witness.
You testified that Jose Menendez was not abusive toward you, correct?
Yes,
However, if things in his work environment change, would he indicate in some way that he was displeased?
Sustained.
You recall making some notes of your characterizations of Jose Menendez.
yes,
Overall, the answer will stand.
You recall characterizing him
All
as
right, if it relates to the same question you just asked before that I sustained an objection to, the objection is still sustained, even if she made a statement before.
Could I make an offer of proof as to that, Your Honor?
If it's the same thing, then it's still irrelevant. So
Well, it's not the same. The offer of proof is different than the question. Just
Right.
want to state the relevancy of it for the court.
All right, why don't you ask something else?
That was my last question.
Okay, then you may approach
All right.
and do that. All right, and there'll be brief redirect examination, as I understand it, and then there's going to be some very brief testimony before the Eric Menendez jury only with this witness, and then we'll go on to the next witness. So we're almost through with this witness.
Eisenberg, you indicated on cross-examination that there were occasions when you picked up Eric Menendez in high school.
yes.
And why was it that you were picking him up? Where was his mother?
To my knowledge, she was in New Jersey.
When Mr. Menendez first came to California, did he come out here before his wife?
To work here, yes. I mean, she came with him and went back.
Did she often leave California and go back to New Jersey during the first couple of months that he was out here?
Yes,
And my last question is, you indicated that on occasion when Mrs. Menendez was called that her speech was slurred. Did you notice this before you went back to New York in '88, after you came back in '89, or both?
before I left in '88.
So somewhere between 1986 and 1988?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, anything else on that limited redirect? All right, what we'll do then, since there has been the indication it'll be very short testimony before the blue jury, is I'll ask that the gold jury, rather than going to your jury room, just go into this jury room, invade the domain of the other jurors. Don't touch anything in there. And we'll have you out in just a couple of minutes, and then we'll proceed. The gold jury has left. Ms. Abrahamson.
I just wanted to ask two. I'll wait for giggling.
All right, we have giggling in the audience, the jury in the audience, and some loud conversation in the jury room. Must be a reaction to what's in the jury room.
Critiquing.
I can only imagine what it is.
Can I go there?
I just wanted to ask you two questions, Ms. Eisenberg. First of all, do you recall a time some months after Kitty and Jose died when Eric came up to the office?
Yes.
And could you describe what his demeanor was like when you saw him on that occasion?
He was quiet. We sat and talked for a while. He commented to me that he thought his mother was pathetic. I tried to explain to him that she was troubled, and we cried together.
And did he ask you a question?
Yes, he asked me when the pain would go away.
And is it your best recollection that this conversation with him was sometime after October?
I believe so.
And just one other thing, in your opinion, over the course of the years that you knew him, was Eric Menendez just a nice kid?
I would think so, for the most part, yeah.
That's how you described him?
Mhm.
Did you know?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Any questions?
No.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. And are you ready with the next witness?
Yes, I just need to get a couple of exhibits. so I know what
Okay,
numbers they are.
let's have the other jury out, and we'll proceed with the next witness.
Leslie H. Zoeller.
Detective Zoeller, up on the board, I have Exhibit 20, which is kind of crooked, but do you see in the exhibit that there's a coffee table depicted, and I think it says coffee table on it?
Yes,
Now, in this particular diagram, is the coffee table in the same position in which it was when you first entered the crime scene and Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were still there? Did you? I think I asked the question wrong. The coffee table in the diagram Exhibit 20, is that position the same as when you first saw the coffee table, when you first walked in the room on August 20th or 21st?
it appears not.
All right, and how would you describe its position when you first saw it in relationship to this diagram?
In relation to the diagram, the coffee table was a little bit more parallel to the couch.
And by parallel to the couch, are you talking to the part of the couch where Mr. Menendez was seated?
Correct. It wasn't completely parallel. It was just a little bit more than is depicted in the diagram.
Now, I'm going to show you another diagram, Exhibit 6. You've been present during almost the whole trial, correct?
That's correct.
And in Exhibit 6, I believe there was some testimony by one of the two defendants that there's a staircase in this exhibit which doesn't actually exist in the house. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was this particular diagram taken from blueprints from the house?
Yes, it was.
Now, we've been talking about the coffee table. I have two exhibits here, which are Exhibit 251 and 250, which appear to show, among other things, the coffee table. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on the coffee table, when you went into the room and depicted in the photographs, was there a television guide which was opened?
Yes.
Okay, have you had a chance to look at a copy of the TV guide from the week starting August the 20th of 1989? An original copy of the TV guide?
For August 20th?
Yes, starting Sunday, August the 20th, 1989.
Yes.
Your Honor, I would object to, I think it counts as misleading the witness by calling it a TV guide. It's not TV guide.
All right,
It's-
what are you
I'm sorry.
referring to?
That's,
I'm sorry, it's the Los Angeles Times TV reference, right? Is that what you understand it to be?
Yes.
May I please?
Yes.
In the photographs which you have in front of you, 250 and 251, can you see a kind of advertisement on the lower right-hand corner of a certain page of the TV guide, the TV Los Angeles Times TV guide?
Yes.
Okay, and here I have a television guide, television times from August the 20th, 1989 through August 26, 1989. And on page 11, there appears to be an ad for a show called Diamonds. Now, do you see this ad in the TV guide I have here today in either photograph 250 or 251?
Yes, it appears to be the same.
All right, and on the same page in the TV guide I'm holding here are program listings starting at 6:30 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Your Honor, for the record, I have copies of both the front of the TV Times and the page in reference. And in Exhibit 251, can you notice that the TV time is curled back so that the only portion that is on the table is the portion for the Times at 6:30 that night?
Yes, that's correct.
Detective Zoeller, you attended the autopsy of Mrs. Menendez, is that correct?
That's correct.
And during the autopsy, did you become aware of the fact that one of Mrs. Menendez's...
I'm going to object to this, Your Honor. I'd ask.
Okay.
Detective Zoeller, after the testimony of Lyle Menendez, did you drive the route that was explained by him in his testimony as that which occurred after the homicides?
Yes.
And on how many separate occasions did you drive that route?
2 times.
And what was your total driving time the second time you drove it, for instance?
51 minutes.
When you drove that particular route, did you go to Century City Shopping Mall?
Yes, I did.
Did you notice whether there were parking meters outside of the Century City shopping mall?
There were not.
How long have you worked in Beverly Hills?
Since 1976.
Is Century City right on the outskirts of Beverly Hills?
It is.
Had you ever been to Century City shopping mall prior to going there to trace the route?
Yes.
Okay. Had you ever seen or known that there were parking meters outside of Century City?
I have never known Century City to have any parking meters.
Now, at one point in your driving this particular route, did you go, in fact, to the top of Coldwater Canyon where it intersects Mulholland Drive?
Yes.
And did you turn left on Mulholland Drive in order to find a place where the guns might have been tossed?
Yes, I did.
And in order to do that, did you have to find a place that looked like a place where guns could actually be secreted?
Yes, I went to the first area where you could actually pull off of the roadway.
Before you got to the area where you can actually pull off the roadway, did you notice a number of houses on the right side?
Yes, I did.
And as you were traveling west on Mulholland, were you looking for places on the north side of Mulholland that would be overlooking the San Fernando Valley?
Yes, I was.
Okay. When you finally came to the place where you could pull out, could you describe the kind of vegetation there was in that area?
It was very thick brush and an occasional tree.
Now, prior to going on this particular drive, you had been up in that area in 1990, is that correct?
Yes.
When you went on the drive in 1993, did the brush appear to be any different from the density or the growth that you saw in 1990?
No.
And how would you describe the lighting conditions at this place, which was the first place you could pull out on Mulholland west of Coldwater?
There was no lighting at all. The only lights was whatever natural lighting there was.
That would be like moonlight or starlight.
Correct.
During the period of time that you were doing this particular route, did you make a videotape the second time?
Yes.
How would you characterize the videotape? Was it interesting or dull?
Excuse me, Your Honor, what's the yellow?
Sustain.
Okay. Well, you made a videotape, correct?
That's correct.
And did you give a copy of it to the defense?
Yes.
And were you here for the testimony of Ms. Ertley that she received that copy?
Yes.
Now, on May the 24th of 1993, did Mr. Ed Fenno come to the Beverly Hills Police Department to be interviewed by myself, Mr. Kuriyama, and you?
Yes.
Could I ask the counsel refrain from that so I could get my Ed Fennell file for a minute?
Okay, well, I can ask a different
I know you're
topic.
going.
All right. Shall I?
You have other questions?
I have one more area and then.
Okay, well, go ahead with
All
whatever
right.
else you have.
Your Honor, I have a photograph, two photographs, actually, a large one and a smaller one. I've shown them to counsel. May they be marked as people, excuse me, the next two exhibits.
387 and 388.
Okay, the larger photo is 387, the smaller one is 388. Counsel?
I've seen these.
May I first, please?
Yes.
To show you the photograph first, which is 387, and is this particular photograph taken at the night that you and the police department went to 722 North Elm?
Yes.
And does that particular photograph depict on the left-hand side the tennis court, on the right-hand side the swimming pool, and behind the guest house?
That's correct.
And when you got to the crime scene and noticed what the environment outside of the particular room where the decedents were, did you notice that the door to the guest house was open like that?
Yes.
And here is a photograph which appears to be of the same scene but in daylight. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That's correct.
That's exhibit 388.
That's correct.
And did you cause that photograph to be taken once daylight broke on the 21st of August?
Yes.
And does that essentially depict the same scene that's in exhibit 387?
Essentially, yes.
May I put this on the board, please?
Yes.
Your Honor, that's all I have of this witness at this time, subject to the other.
Okay. And is there cross-examination on these subjects?
Yes.
Okay.
Detective Zoeller, the diagram with the coffee table, you didn't draw that yourself, I take it.
That's correct.
And was that drawn by someone with the Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes, it was.
And was that diagram drawn after some changes had been made in the room? Let me rephrase it if I may. When you first arrived, the coffee table was not in the position depicted in that drawing, is that correct?
My impression by looking at the drawing, that's correct.
And so at some point in time while you were there, was the coffee table moved?
Yes,
And Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's bodies were removed also, is that correct?
that's correct.
And there were a number of people in that room, is that correct? Was it the evening that you were there when Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were first shot? That morning, the morning of the 21st?
At what point do you say different people were there?
Between the time that you arrived and when this drawing was made?
There were various people in the crime scene, yes.
Would it be fair to say that the drawing that chart depicts is what the room looked like after things had been moved?
That's the impression I have by looking at the coffee table depicted in the diagram, yes.
So it's not representative of the scene you first encountered, is that correct?
Without personally measuring it, I can't say whether it is or is not. It's just my impression by looking at the coffee table looks a little bit, that moved a little bit more than what it was initially.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you about another diagram which has the floor plan of the house, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that floor plan was taken off of some blueprints?
Yes.
Are you aware of any other errors in that floor plan beside the fact that it shows a stairway that doesn't exist?
The only other one is the doorway that was put in from the kitchen to the dining room.
And have you personally checked the house to see if the remainder of the diagram is accurate?
Not after the diagram was made, no.
And when you first went to this location up on Mulholland searching for the guns, you said that was 1990?
That's
Is that
correct.
When in 1990?
Approximately March of 1990.
And so you didn't have the opportunity to go up there and look around in August of 89?
I had no reason to go up there in August of 89, that's correct.
Right. And you did not go up there at any time before March of 1990? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the photographs that you've identified of the guest house, do you know when those photographs were taken, more specifically, other than nighttime and daytime?
The photo where it looks like it's dark was taken the night of the 20th, early morning of the 21st.
Do you know what time?
I do not know.
Do you know if anybody had been in the guest house to search for people or for evidence prior to the taking of that photograph?
I do know that the police personnel had gone in there and informed me that nothing was disturbed by them.
But there had been people in there prior
That's
to
correct.
the taking of the photograph.
That's correct.
Do you know how many people?
I have no idea.
Do you know who?
I can only speculate. No, I don't.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any examination on behalf of the defendant Eric Menendez?
Let me see if I understand. You agree, Detective Zoeller, there's no staircase in the location that diagram shows.
That's correct.
And you remember when Eric Menendez testified, he corrected that diagram?
Yes.
Were his corrections right?
Yes.
You were aware that that house was basically gutted and rebuilt at some point, were you not?
I know it was remodeled or rebuilt. I'm not sure whether it was gutted or not.
Do you remember what the date of the blueprints were?
I do not.
Could they have been the blueprints before the house was for the original building of the house rather than for the redo?
It was for the redo of the house.
Okay. Just talk to you for a minute about the coffee table and the open TV guide. When you got there, was the TV on?
Yes, it was.
What was on it?
As far as the show?
Yeah.
I don't know.
What station?
I don't know, other than I have an impression it was Channel 5. I don't know how I have that impression, though.
A commercial channel?
Yes.
I want to talk to you a little bit about this route. You said you drove after Lyle testified. I take it you didn't drive after Eric did.
That's correct.
Okay. And when you get to Mulholland, I mean, at the top of Coldwater Canyon, if you first make a left, at first there's houses or shrubbery on the right, correct?
That's correct.
At different times, well, strike that. And then sometimes on the left there are houses, and sometimes on the left there's mountain.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you said you went to the first turnoff. Are you talking about an area where you could actually pull your car completely off the road and there's like a big dirt, gravel, crescent-shaped space off to the right?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with an area up there where there is now a new housing development on the left-hand side of the road? Very shishi gated thing.
Yes.
Okay. How far from that area did you do your examination? That's on the non-valley side. That's on the town side, the housing development, correct?
That's correct.
It's on the left. The valley side is on the right, right?
Traveling west, that's correct.
Okay. How far from that housing development did you do your visual or examination or your search in 1990?
I believe we did it in that general area.
Okay.
The search actually encompassed from approximately a half mile east of Coldwater on Mulholland, and then from that point west, at times all the way to and past the San Diego Freeway.
Now, if you look down that hill, the one that overlooks the valley, at the bottom of the hill, there are streets, are there not, and houses?
Yes,
So eventually, I suppose, if you throw something down that hill and water comes, it could wash it all the way down to somebody's backyard down below.
Sustained.
Based on the way the topography is situated, it's just a sheer hill down to houses below, correct? In some places.
in some places, yes.
All right. Are you familiar with an area near the housing development where there is a water drainage system, a rather elaborate culvert catch basin?
Which side of the road?
The valley side.
I don't recall, no.
And I take it then that you don't recall that there are actually 3 or 4 such areas on the right side of the road where there's water courses going down the valley side within, say, about a quarter of a mile of that newly built housing development. Quarter of a
Understand the
mile.
question?
I don't. How elaborate are you indicating these are?
Well, there's like these concrete little bridge-like things, and then there's, I know one of them has a concrete, looks like a concrete piping system down the hill. Do you remember that one? That's like right across the street from the new housing tract.
I remember some areas like that, exactly the position of them in reference to the housing tract, I don't recall.
Okay,
no.
well, there's that one, and then a little farther west on the road, you recall, there's another area like that with a concrete little bridge-like structure over a drainage-type system going down the hill.
I don't recall exactly the position of these.
Okay. Do you recall, with respect to any of those kinds of areas, that there's like a ravine free of vegetation that flows along the water course?
Sustained.
Well, with respect to the one, for example, that's right near the housing tract, you say you looked down the hill. Did you see that there's a dirt area where there's no vegetation right around the water pipe?
I don't recall, no.
Did you ever go down that hill near that housing development?
I, along with approximately 10 to 15 other police officers, combed that area. I don't recall that particular area myself, no.
Okay, so you don't know that you ever went down there?
When you say you're referring to him.
You
That's
personally.
person.
No,
Correct.
that's correct.
All right. And you didn't do any of this combing until March or April of 1990?
That's correct.
And you recollect that there were rains the winter of 1989, 1990?
I don't recall offhand, but I would assume that there was some rain.
Probably not a whole lot, but some.
Correct.
And did you ever do any investigating with the water district to see what the amount of water that drainage pipe would be sending down that hill?
No.
Now, returning to this route that you drove, one of the stops you made, well, first of all, you left from the rear of North Elm Drive, is that correct?
I actually left from the front of North Elm Drive, but the indication is when I was at the rear is when I started the clock, although
Okay.
the clock on the movie starts a minute prior.
Now, you made a right, well, I don't understand. Did you go down the alley? Is that what you did?
Yes.
Okay. Did Lyle testify he went down the alley? I don't believe so.
He was unclear of what he did after he turned right.
Okay. So you chose to go down the alley to the next east-west cross street, which was Elevado.
That's correct.
And then you made another right, did you not, to get back to Elm and go south on Elm?
That's correct.
Now, Lyle didn't testify to that, did he? That he went on Elevado and then a left onto Elm?
That's correct. He was uncertain what he had done after he turned right.
Okay. And then you went to Century City by using North Santa Monica Boulevard. Is that big or little? Is that big Santa Monica?
That's big Santa Monica.
Okay. And you got to the Century City the Century City Shopping Center where the movies are, correct?
Yes.
Did you go up and buy a ticket?
No.
Did you go into the subterranean parking structure?
Yes.
Now, Lyle hadn't testified that he did that, had he?
No, he had not. He testified he went to a metered parking space.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. And then after you left Century City, you went back to North Santa Monica Boulevard and basically went back eastbound to Rexford Drive and then went up to Coldwater and Mulholland, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, after that, you went back down to Santa Monica Boulevard, correct?
That's correct.
And you chose to take Santa Monica Boulevard all the way out to Santa Monica.
That's correct.
Okay. Did Lyle Menendez testify they took Santa Monica Boulevard?
No,
He said he didn't know what street.
that's correct.
And in your estimation, is Santa Monica Boulevard the fastest street between Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, or one of the slower ones?
I picked that because it was a major thoroughfare.
Olympic is a major thoroughfare too, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And there are fewer lights on Olympic than on Santa Monica Boulevard, are there not? That's why Olympic is a major commuter street.
Objection, argumentative, same fact, not evidence.
Sustained.
Isn't Olympic Boulevard also a much broader street than Santa Monica Boulevard?
In West LA, it is, yes.
Okay, now you stopped at some gas station on the corner of Selby Avenue. Can't quite read that. Is that Selby and Santa Monica Boulevard?
Yes.
Did Lyle Menendez testify he stopped at that particular gas station?
No.
Did you take any photographs of that gas station?
Still photographs?
Yeah.
No.
Now, at some point in your travels, Mrs. Pazanich wanted to ask you about the video, but at some point, did somebody drop the camera?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Who was the camera person?
My wife?
Does she do that for a living?
No.
And did you maintain a mileage log for each piece of the journey?
Not each piece, no.
And did you maintain a log of the your speed?
No.
I have nothing further at this juncture, Your Honor.
Shall I do,
How long would it be?
couple questions?
Okay.
Detective Zoeller, you've been a Beverly Hills Police Department officer for a number of years, correct?
Correct.
And you've driven through Beverly Hills on more than one occasion.
Correct.
Did you attempt in this ride to take the most direct route you could?
Yes.
And did you view the tape, the videotape that Miss Erdely, the defense investigator, prepared in this case?
Yes, I did.
And the total driving time in that tape versus the tape that you made, was there a difference of 1 minute?
Yes, there was.
And, never mind, I have nothing further.
All right. In a moment, we'll excuse everybody until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I want to speak briefly with the gold jury about a couple of matters, so I'll keep you here for just a couple of minutes and do that. And the blue jury, if those of you who are ready to leave without going into the jury room, you can leave. If those some of you want to go into the jury room, I'd ask that you stay there for a couple of minutes until I finish talking to these jurors, and then we can let everybody go at the same time. But when you do leave, all of you, please come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock, please. And we'll also, please don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. And don't permit yourselves to be exposed to anything about this case outside of the courtroom. And as far as the blue jurors, you can either leave now and go home, or if you have to go into the jury room, just stay in there for a couple of minutes until I finish with the gold jury. And in regards to the gold jury, there are a couple of things I want to tell you about some of the testimony that you heard yesterday, and that relates solely to the evidence that was introduced before you. First of all, in reference to the testimony of Miss Eisenberg, who testified yesterday briefly before you, there was an answer that she gave in which she referred to a phone call or a phone conversation she had with the defendant Lyle Menendez about a will. That answer, the entire reference to a will is, and that reference to that phone conversation is stricken, and you're admonished to disregard the entirety of the answer in reference to the will, or a will. And also in regards to the testimony of Brian Andersen, he testified in regards to a conversation that he testified that he had with Jose Menendez, in which Mr. Menendez told him that he was going to have a conversation with the defendant Lyle Menendez. In regards to that conversation between Mr. Andersen and Mr. Menendez, that evidence is received only for the purpose of showing the intent of Mr. Menendez to have a conversation with Lyle Menendez and for no other purpose. And you are to receive it for that purpose only. In regards to the notes I've received from various jurors yesterday regarding requests, I've shown those to the lawyers. I'll discuss those with the lawyers further. At this point, I would indicate that the odds are that those requests that you're making won't be honored, that we won't be able to accommodate those requests that you've indicated in your notes, but I'll talk further with the lawyers about that. All right, do counsel have anything further you wanted to discuss prior to excusing the jurors? All right, then you're excused, ladies and gentlemen. See you back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock.